Good morning, one and all. Thank you for being here, as we all are now. And it is January 15th, I believe, in the morning on Sunday. We're all getting together again this week to discuss the mental obsession and our experiences and talk about principles and absolute principles, which is what principles actually are, in ways that allow us to begin to see the nature of our existence is very different than the one we tend to create in our own thinking. And I think in relation to Alcoholics Anonymous having been benefited from what Bill Wilson did so significantly in my own life, when I finally began to admit things that had been obvious to me, that I knew but refused to admit, so I could continue to do the thing that was wrong, which for me was drinking and using drugs a lot, which I was very good at. I was a master at that. And I was a master at denying that I had the problem so I could continue doing it and causing the problems that I thought were consequences that were hoisted on me rather than created by me. And in the process of discovery, I'm starting to actually look at what the actual problem was. When I admitted that I had a problem with drinking, I all of a sudden had a freedom from that choice and realized that I'd always had the choice. I'd just been trying to prove the thought I had about it was true and real, that I could control it, that I could enjoy it. And it started to occur to me very early in sobriety that what I really had a problem with was thinking. And that as soon as I picked up the first thought that wasn't true and tried to perfect it by maintaining it, I was always in conflict with the seeming reality I created while thinking that reality was somewhat distinct from me and happening to me rather than being caused by me. And that became my sober pledge, effectively, is to look at that and begin to recognize that the ultimate disease of addiction is mental. And emotional sobriety, which is sane living in all respects, because sanity isn't exclusive to some insanity. It's about sanity, healthy living, sober living, is starting to see that where that thinking invades my experience at any level, where I allow it to because I start it and I maintain it, I am going to absolutely guaranteed suffer the consequences that come. They are not choices at that point I am creating. I am choosing those consequences while I will act as though I have nothing to do with it. So one of the things that was made very clear in the big book is this deflation of ego and deflation and minimization of the impact of ego and the completely abandoning of ourself and the letting go absolutely of old ideas. What are old ideas? They're thoughts I have now that are about something else somewhere else that I think is true and real, that's so true and real that I continue to maintain them. And they infect my present moment because I'm continuing to choose those thoughts. So the idea of letting go of old thoughts is beginning to realize that the present state of our awareness is always new. The potential of everything possible is always possible. And one of those things possible is to begin to think that what I think is true and real and end up feeling condemned as a result of that thought. Because if thinking is thinking, what I'm thinking of is what I'm thinking. If I think of my arm, I don't think I become my arm. But when thinking thinks about thinking, it seems to think it's all I am, because I become consumed with the thoughts that come out of that. Or at least I feel like I'm consumed by it because I'm consumed with the consequences of those thoughts. If I feel condemned, it's because I'm thinking things that have no life. They have no reality. I'm condemned to an experience that's vacant and void, and I feel empty, and I want to fill that space with something, but it never seems to be the right thing when I think of it in terms of consumer goods or drugs and alcohol, some exterior substance, rather than seeing it's the fault of my own non-substantive thinking I'm suffering from. So when Bill talked about letting go of it frustrated me for a long time when he said, completely abandon yourself. And I kept thinking, how do you abandon yourself? How do you let go of this thing? Because the more I thought about it, the more I seemed to be connected to it. And the more I thought about abandoning it, the more I seemed connected to it. But he also talked about insanity. And insanity is a delusion. It's seeing things that aren't happening as though they're happening. And in the obsessive thinking, it's thinking that the obsessive thinking is real because it seems like it's all that's happening. It doesn't mean it's all that's happening. It just seems like it's all that's happening because it's all I'm focused on. And ego is built into that self, because when I think my thoughts are true and real and what I'm thinking is true and real, I become the creator of truth and reality. And I immediately think the only thing I am is that truth and reality. And I am now on a crusade to prove to the world that my image of self is in fact the self they should be living up to. So I feel as though everyone and everything is a fault and a blame and a potential threat to my existence because they don't think like me. So all it ever is a thought about a thought. And when all I think about is what I think about, all I'm doing is thinking incessantly about thought. I'm not thinking about myself. When we talk about talking to ourselves, who are we talking to? It would suggest that there's already two of us in our brain if I am talking to myself. That's schizophrenia. We're admitting it openly, while in fact thinking it's what we're doing. It's not what we're doing. What we're thinking is what we're thinking. And what we're thinking about is what we're thinking. It's just a thought. And thoughts are imagined. The contents of thoughts are imagined. I don't know what thoughts are at a physiological level because they can't be seen. Nobody's ever been able to register them, weigh them, create the form for them. They're unseen like feelings. They're invisible. And yet the invisibility of our nature in this universe seems to be the most profound aspect of nature. So whatever they are, and what I do with them is what I choose to do. If I think who I am is only what I think there's no greater awareness. I think my eyes are closed. And ego, if you think of looking into a mirror and thinking that what you're seeing in that mirror are your eyes, it would be to miss the fact that it's a reflection of your eyes, and that reflection is always going to be backward. Always. You're going to see your eyes backward, your face backward every time you look in a mirror. Now, we say often, that's me. It isn't me. It's a reflection. And when I think ego is me, I miss the fact that ego is it's an attempt to reverse the law of nature, reverse the law of order, and wonder why so much havoc and mayhem comes as a result of operating on that basis. So if there is any hope for emotional sobriety, it's beginning to see that our nature can be heavily influenced by our thinking, but it doesn't create any reality. It just creates a condition that we suffer from and maintain to make believe it's reality and true because we're aware of what reality and truth is and the permanence of it and the constancy of it. We're aware of that. But we tend to block that absolute knowing nature, not because we're actually blocking it, but because we're not thinking about it at all. We're not allowing that knowing nature to be obvious as it is, because our existence depends on it. I said a couple of weeks ago, I was reading the Time and Being, I think, or something like that by Martin Heidegger. And he said, if you can even ask the question as to why you exist, you are confirming that you exist. Pretty simple. We can't even ask the questions. We couldn't have doubt if we didn't exist. So the basis of our existence is not threatened by these things, but the impact on our experience is traumatic. And it's a present traumatic stress disorder that suffering comes from. The anxiety, the depression is all happening in the present. It's not the past, it's not the future, because those are just concepts that we think about. And the present is the culmination of everything we've ever done and everything that has ever been thought and acted on. Everything right now. So there's no other place to be. There's no other place we've ever been while we've been thinking there is some other place. So if there is freedom, which I would say there is, to feel condemned is a function of the thinking we're doing that's condemned. It's not a function of reality. It's not a function of us being so bad and so horrible and so this and so that to justify killing ourselves or using drugs and alcohol to kill ourselves slowly, or some other form. It can be gambling, sex, risky sex. It can be overeating, eating poor quality food. There's all sorts of, every compulsion is a reflection of an obsessive thought trying to escape my brain because I'm trying desperately to get rid of this thing I know is sick and I know is wrong. So ultimately, the idea of letting go absolutely, as we're asked to do, is beginning to realize that all we've been holding on to in the present is an idea that there's something to hold on to. The more I try to fix the ego through self-help, the more I give credence to it as even existing. And I continue to develop a narrative around it that gives it a sense of place. But all it really is a play and a script I'm writing about it to justify the continuation of thinking someday it will be healthy enough to be reliable. And I'm creating it in my own choice. It isn't there other than to my thinking it's there. And collectively, because we're built on the same platform, we fail in the same way. It isn't something we do differently. We just attach different times, places, and faces to it. So if it isn't there and I'm thinking it's there, it's my thinking that has no substance that I'm struggling with. And the ultimate substance abuse is realizing that when I think thoughts that have no substance have substance, I am a self-abusing, depleting self-worth, depreciating my value, feeling low self-esteem, feeling self-loathing. All of those things accurately assess the thinking I'm doing, not the who that I am or the what that I am or the where that I am. Doesn't have any impact on that at all, except to the thinking I do about all those things. That's it. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning, Chris, Gabe, Loretta, everyone.
Good morning.
So in the self-help movement, we're trying to help the self that doesn't exist. That's sick. We're trying to get better at maintaining the idea that there's something there that's sick rather than realize it's sick to think there's something there. It's like a lie. There's no basis to a lie. So what does it claim? Only to be true. A lie is only a lie as long as it's claimed to be true. As soon as it's claimed to be a lie, what is it? Gone. No effort. Nothing. Morning, Jenna. So the only conflicts we suffer, the turmoil, the emotional turmoil, and the inner conflicts are all being generated by thoughts that we think are true that are just thoughts. And if you begin to simply look at the fact that they're thoughts, they're imagined, you'll see immediately it starts taking the weight because the conflict is being dissipating. The insistence, the demands, the focus is starting to actually dissipate. And it's a lot more fun to think and imagine and be creative and innovative when you don't think your life depends on it.
Absolutely. So, Jack?
Yes.
Would that be as simple as replacing these thoughts, or not necessarily replacing them, but switching your interest to the principles and being able to see through that in the moment of these untrue thoughts that we've made up?
Here's one of the issues, Loretta. We have become such masters at pretending we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, where we're doing, when we're doing it, that we think what we should first thing to do is something other than what we're doing, where we are doing what we're doing. So the point is, if you look at what you're doing that's causing the impression and start to say, this is just a thought, and if it's causing that impression, it can't be true, because if the nature of existence is love and life and light, then all I'm doing is creating an impression that isn't true. That's all, period. It will dissipate as quickly as it's seen accurately, and it will continue to grow as long as it's maintained inaccurately. So it's to begin to realize, Loretta, that absolute principles aren't choices. And yet we cannot be condemned by them, which is an interesting idea, because choices tend to be the things we're condemned by within thought. Choices to think things that aren't true are a problem. So in the absolute state of things, there's no condemnation because it's all about freedom. Why? Because there are no lies. There's no such thing as a lie. There's no such thing as insanity. There's no such thing as disease. There's only absolute pure perfection. And that, if it's a source of the universe, must be our source, or we would somehow be more powerful than it to deny it. We can deny it. We can act like it. But it's an act. It's simply a thought. So one of the points to your point, Loretto, that we discussed in the last few weeks is starting to look not at how to stop it, but start to claim that we're starting it. Start to see that we, in fact, are starting it if it's existing right now. Because why? The moment's new. And what we're doing in the moment is what's causing the impact we're feeling. Cause and effect are immediate. They're simultaneous. We don't have to wait for the problem to get horrible to notice there's a problem because we feel disturbed. That's what we notice. There's a disturbance. Absolute states of being do not have disturbances.
Huh. That makes sense.
So this is ultimately the surrender, is realizing there's nothing to surrender to. That all I'm doing is maintaining ideas that pose a fight, that give me an impression there's something to fight. And all I'm doing is continuing to maintain that idea, which gives me those same impressions. That's it. There's nothing there to fight. How can you be given everything and think you're condemned?
Right. Well, so would the disturbance be an alarm, so to speak?
Yes,
Okay.
it's body language saying, hey, something's wrong here. The fire alarm's going off. There may be a fire.
All right.
That's all. So what do? Try to put duct tape over the fire alarm by self-help and feel better about what's wrong. That would be an example. And what happens? We get burned.
Yeah.
We start to actually feel worse and feel afraid. And that fear is accurate. Feeling worse is accurate. It's telling us we're doing something worse and we're creating something worth fearing. Why? Because we're letting the problem get worse. We're denying what's happening. We're feeling the disturbance and thinking denying it is the solution. Denial is the psychic anesthesia. It's all it is. It's momentary gratification for long-term pain, just like addiction. Feel better in the moment, but certainly whatever is wrong is getting worse as the moments pass and we ignore what's happening.
Could this also just be like drama, getting in a drama?
Well, it certainly isn't a comedy when you're in it.
No.
Yeah. Doesn't seem that funny.
Well, no, I said drama.
I know, but drama is the flip side of comedy. So the point is that if we're creating it, we're actually dramatizing it to give it some sense of reality when in fact we're just creating an experience to justify it.
Right.
That's pretty sick. That would be insane. So it's not emotional sobriety. Bill Wilson said in his letter, he needed to cut away false dependencies. What greater false dependency could we have than making believe what we think is truth and reality? We are challenging the entire universe for what it's already freely given us by claiming it's up to us to do. What greater burden could we choose at the core of our thinking than to make believe what we're thinking is truth and reality, when in fact, if we are made of truth and reality, thinking is a byproduct of truth and reality. It wasn't given to us to condemn ourselves to suicide and addiction. It was given to us to actually be productive and generous and have something to offer that was shared. The bounty of what we have, we already share.
Okay, that makes so much sense. Because in a way, sometimes when you come out as competitive or defensive, when you're into your defensive, sometimes I'll sit there and think, what am I trying to defend here?
Well, here's the thing. You see how you ask the question? The reason we're always in doubt is we're constantly asking questions.
Not as bad, though. I got some sleep for sure, but as that probably.
Jana?
And
You gotta
your
move.
microphone talk.
Mute for us.
Oh, sorry.
Anthony, you'll be in charge of that. Thank you. We're happy to see you, though, Janet.
I'm in France right now. I'm in France.
So you can still do that from there, I'm imagining, right?
Yeah.
I know that there's a lot of
6:30, right?
peculiarities to the French tendencies, but one of them is probably not monitoring mute in Zoom. Or there can be, at least we can think there are. So Loretta, here's the issue. We tend to think that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. What are we doing? What am I doing? How am I doing it? What does that lead to? Questions. Has the question ever been resolved for humans to still be seeking? No. They're still seeking an answer because we keep asking the questions. What we're avoiding is what's happening. That it's happening is what we're avoiding. So as you feel the disturbance, the only thing you're being given is a clear understanding there's a disturbance. Go with that. That's what's happening. And say, oh, I'm disturbed. And when you begin to realize the disturbances are all coming from ideas you have, you don't have to name them. You don't have to identify them. You don't need to know when they started, what they're about, who was there, what happened, none of it. Like we were talking earlier with Arliss about memory. The memory is always going to fail. It's never going to be the sum total of everything, because everything that ever happened when it happened was happening in relation to everything. How am I going to remember all that anyhow? Even if I had perfect clarity, like a video camera of the instance, I wouldn't have clarity beyond that video of all the other interactive capacity that was actually incurred in that moment. So I'll never get it right. But what is right is what's happening now. If I simply concede that it's happening and start to realize that disturbances are imposed by thoughts in conflict, and realize that thoughts are just thoughts, so clearly they're not imposing anything on me than what I'm making believe is true and real, so I'm feeling it as a result, I'm manifesting the feeling, it starts to dissipate. Because you say, oh, and I will guarantee you, like principles in right and principles in wrong are always going to be the same. Wrong will never work, right will always work. So if I approach something wrong and say what I'm feeling I need to get away from, I need to stop, I need to figure out how it happened, why it happened, when it happened, where it happened, with who it happened, all I'm doing is sending myself on a circuitous route away from where I am. I think it's somewhere else. If everything's happening in the present as it's happening in the present, nothing is ever anywhere else. It's all here now. So that simple awareness of I'm disturbed. What became very clear to me last year that we've been talking about since then was that the majority, and Bill Wilson talks about this, the majority of what we suffer from are motivations, these hidden motivation, these mental blank spots, he called them, which we think are the subconscious. How could they be subconscious if we talk about the subconscious openly? The impact of those things I want to make believe I'm not doing, that I've gotten so good at pretending I'm not doing because I've been so busy trying to pretend what's happening isn't happening so that I could feel better for a minute, are actually what I have hidden in the self-conscious. And I think it's hidden, but they're constantly revealed in the reactions I have to people that catch me off guard. Why would I be off guard if I wasn't thinking I should always be on guard, defensive? And all of a sudden I find myself doing things that are embarrassing because I've been exposed for the fraud of making believe those things are actually hidden when they are in fact all of my reactive, impulsive, compulsive tendencies. They're reflecting all that stuff. I think because I'm embarrassed to admit it. I think I'm hiding it. I'm not hiding it at all. They're coming up every time I get near anybody that has anything similarly. I react to it. I start popping off like bubbles. Starts rising up and I start getting enturbulated and disturbed. And I'm pretty sure it's them, almost positive it's them. Why are you hurting my feelings? Why are you attacking me? When in fact, I'm actually witnessing the attack I've placed on my own self that doesn't exist as an interior justification for the fact that it must exist to be causing so much havoc. So I'm using pain as justification for reality when pain is in fact an indication of something wrong.
So in a perfect world, okay,
Which we are.
okay, how do you just stop doing that?
Well, the question again is why do you keep starting?
Well, I think it's because it's so habitual.
But think about it. Just you're going to give me the excuses now that are your answer. You
No,
asked the question.
Well, okay, then
You're going to give me go ahead though. Give me the excuses because I want to hear them. And
no, they're not excuses. So I'll rephrase the question to
no, you're trying to avoid it again, Loretta. You have excuses for starting these things. It's okay. So do I. I've used them for years. They don't work. They're never going to work.
All right,
That's
so
what we're here to talk about.
Okay, so thoughts,
Yes.
right? Word, is it thoughts become words or words become thoughts? I can't remember.
I would say words and feelings reflect thoughts. Thoughts are primary.
Okay, so with thoughts,
Choices.
right, and maybe pre-attached emotions that you have attached to it.
Where are they? Where are those emotions?
The thoughts. They are attached to the thoughts.
Okay, where are they though?
They are I don't know if it's your they're inside your head. You know,
Well, they're now. They're happening now.
Right. They come in the now, but they may not be true. They're from thoughts or choices that I don't know, choices that you've made, and these thoughts may not be true. Like,
Okay, but let's just focus. It's what you're thinking about them now that you're impacted by.
right.
So the idea they're somewhere else is one of the things that I'd like to wean you of. and
Right.
just say that habitual habit that you're talking about is the habit of constantly thinking they're somewhere else and that you don't know where they are when you know exactly where they are now. Exactly.
All
They're
right.
right here. They're only what you're thinking about them now. That's what memory is. We're trying to memorialize. We're trying to remember what's dismembered. It doesn't make any sense if everything that's happening is happening now and we're aware of it. As we concede that we're aware of it, and the awareness of it is the thought I have that it's somewhere else, it's a good indication that it's one of the impulses I have to think I need to be somewhere else to solve it. Well, if I'm only wherever I am, there's no solution in thinking I've got to go somewhere else to do it. It's only here now, right now, right now.
Right. All right.
By the way, there's no term wrong now. Nobody ever uses wrong now. Wrong now. We use right now because it's always right now. Right is now.
So what about the fact maybe that they become uninteresting?
Well, I think when you're consumed obsessively with something, you think it's fascinating, but you're actually fascinated with insanity and the idea that the mirage in the distance is somehow going to be realized if you exert all your effort to get there.
I know, but if you're not interested in that,
I understand. But insanity is that interest, because you're interested in it as though there's some dividend you're going to get from it, and there isn't. Like, think of interest in both terms. Interest on a bank account means you put the money in, you expect a certain return. The return from the interest we spent, we expect something back. We expect the promise, and the promise of a lie is a broken promise. It's always going to fail. Always.
Okay, so maybe I'm saying this wrong. What I'm trying to say is, when you have these alarms, they're right then. So what
Yes.
about an alarm becomes uninteresting rather than dramatic? You know,
You wouldn't have an alarm.
well, that would be nice.
Yeah, but you notice that the immediacy of your own impulse is actually setting the fire alarm off.
Oh,
It's-
okay.
You're actually creating the alarm as an indication that you're wrong. If somebody was climbing a mountain and they were hanging off the edge of the mountain and they went to reach for something, there's an awareness greater than the thinking we're doing and the seeing we're doing of what's going on. If we begin to think that all we are doing is thinking, we're going to rely on a very, very little bit of information that's constantly changing because it's fed with new information. If
Right.
that greater awareness is all of a sudden recognized, it isn't because it's all of a sudden there, it's because we're recognizing it. Most of the impact of what's happening is our knowingness, recognizing that's crazy. Something's wrong. We know in our thoughts what's wrong, and that's why we react with those alarms. We're not paying attention to it accurately, so we're thinking of them as things to escape and get over, which is generally, how do I get over this? Well, this isn't leapfrog. We're not 3 anymore. This is about not getting over it, but having it as it is. If you've created a mess, it's a mess. It doesn't mean it can't disappear. It will disappear as soon as it's seen as a mess. If it's mental, it just goes, it's gone.
Okay.
The alarm's not going to go off. So whenever the alarm goes off, what I notice, Loretta, is that when I run into circumstances that don't go the way I think they should, I realize the investment I've made in thoughts about how things should go because I think the thoughts I have about them are still true.
Okay.
See, when I have think a thought's true, I think only what should happen is what I think. And when it doesn't, I'm upset.
Right.
So what's happened is I've just started to say, oh, of course I'm upset. I think the thought I had about this that isn't happening is true. That's all. Boom.
And can you recap just the problem that Loretta could be having? Like, what is if I missed the beginning of it, I'm a little off on it. What is the problem?
Well, you can always re-listen to the
Can I say
recording, Anthony.
Can I say one thing? I think it's not really necessarily a problem. It is a
Good.
solution, actually. And so to me, it's like
Yes.
expectations to to acceptance, with these expectations of what should be, because that's what my mind thinks. And so that absolutely puts me right into, I am right, you are wrong. And that's the place I don't want to go. So,
But internally, that's the place we are when we think we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. We've created right and wrong. We're doing what we're doing while we think we shouldn't be doing it. So we've created the inner conflict with something that doesn't even exist, and then look at the world through that lens, and that's all we see out there is what's wrong. You just said it, though. And again, intuition is knowledge beyond reason. It's beginning to actually see things so clearly, it becomes obvious. The only thing that we've been oblivious to is the thing we're doing to create the impressions we're creating and think that they're not happening. You just said it, though. The problem becomes the solution. Why? Because the reversed nature of this image we think we are has everything have problems look like problems when in fact there's solutions, and it has solutions look like problems. We've flipped it all around. That's what addiction is. What is addiction? Doing the thing that's killing us and thinking there's no other choice.
Right. And repeating it over and over.
Yes, and thinking, but why do we repeat it? We think someday it's going to come true, like a fantasy, like a 3-year-old in a dress thinking the pumpkin's going to show up any minute.
Or the shoe.
Yeah. The prince. Those aren't lost on people at 3. They're still people are still striving for that, thinking it's going to happen, rather than realizing that our own ability in life isn't a dream. It's actually reality, and it far exceeds any dream we've ever had because it's actually true already.
Right.
It's simply not expressing it in the wholeness of our awareness of it, because we get into we choose these log jams to make believe, well, if everybody else is doing it, what else is there to do? Who am I not to do that anymore? Well, we each have choice. Each of us self-diagnosed our own condition. Why? Because it's the choice we made to think we weren't that thing we were doing, and it wasn't a problem that caused it. We each are free to choose. That's the one thing we actually have freedom over. That's where our control is choice. And when we act like things are happening to us, we have chosen to pretend we didn't make the choice that had those things happen. It's just a choice. It's another choice. So what's the choice? To look at it and say, wow, this is my experience right now that I've created. Right. Absolutely, in all ways, however it seems to pop up, even unexpected, all I'm starting to see are the things I thought were hidden. And I will guarantee you there are no secrets in this universe at all, anywhere.
Well, absolutely. This is kind of off the wall, but the adventure lies in the adventure lies in who has the shoe. So to speak. I'm talking about Cinderella. You may not know about that.
Well, the answer would be we all do. And It's always fit. And it's always, prince or princesses or paupers. We all have that absolute capacity to express that knowing nature, because it's all we've actually ever done while we've been in a delusional, hypnotic state thinking we weren't. It's all that it is. Hallucinations do not require LSD or psilocybin or mushrooms or mescaline.
No.
When we think things that aren't true are true, we are hallucinating and creating images to justify the feelings we're having and justify the stories we're telling. And we continue to develop those stories and think they're real when they're literally performances. They're creating the form.
I'm not going to buy anything. Well, I still think the adventure is nice, and you have to. The adventure lies in who has the shoe. I'm referring to Cinderella. So.
Understand, but if we all have it and aren't expressing it, that's the answer, and we think it's somewhere else. Who has it? Someone we don't know, as though it's a secret. It is not a secret. We know this, and we are heartbroken in our experience to live in ways that don't express this, because my depreciated value in relation to all of those depreciated ideas is that I don't have what I could be giving available because I have discounted my own ability to interact at that level. So everyone I claim to love, I am actually hating in some regard to make believe I'm giving him everything I have when I have not quite done that yet.
Right.
Those sensations are worn by us. They are not, and they wear us out by wearing them.
Yep.
Anxiety and stress and depression are natural consequences of creating anxiety over things we're afraid that we're doing, because we know it's going to lead to the progress in getting worse is that things get worse naturally.
I have a friend here that I tried to explain what this is about a little bit. And I said, it's about anxiety. Don't you get anxiety? Sometimes you go, no, I don't get anxiety. I guess that's just something alcoholic type of behavior, anxiety.
No, those people.
But I guess a lot of people have anxiety.
Anthony, don't underestimate the capacity of people to deny what they're experiencing. This is one, if we have proven one thing as a race, we are masters at that. People who look like they're in charge and are killing swaths of people to prove it are not at ease.
Charge.
Touche, Jack. Touche.
Yeah. And also, by the way, why do you think wine is so popular in France?
Le chardonnay blanc. Voilà. Moi, je sais que c'est sec. Donc, merci.
What did you say, Jack? I didn't hear you.
Said, why do you think wine is so popular in France? Anthony, I'll tell you what, if she doesn't have anxiety, don't pay the bill and leave. See how that goes.
He's staying in my condo. He better pay the bill.
You know what I have learned when people make those claims, if you do one thing they don't want you to do, you'll see how uneasy they are. We walk to a drummer based on what we think we're projecting and then live up to those ideas in a depreciated way of acting. And it isn't true. It corrodes our terminals, so we become less sentient as sentient beings and less aware of all we know, at least to the degree that we use it to justify, just like you did the habitual tendency, Loretta. That idea that it's so habitual we can't stop is the idea that we keep insisting on restarting it as though we have no other option. It's just a lie.
Hey, wait, we just got a fine point. We started talking about anxiety, and I mentioned, if your mom's okay, your job. She goes, well, that's
just worrying.
That's just worrying. That's not anxiety.
That's normal.
Yeah.
It's just worrying. She goes, that's just worrying.
That's
Or
normal.
just concern, maybe.
So the portion of it we're talking about, though, is it isn't to say there aren't things that are disturbing in the world. But I will assure you, I am not paying attention to any of those things when my focus is on the obsession that I'm concerned about. I don't even notice that there's problems in the world because I've incapacitated my ability to actually help in those regards. And I've become not help in those regards. I've actually helped those things get worse by my own disenfranchised, seeming disconnected state. So looking at things accurately means seeing disturbances, but the difference is when there's something accurately seen, there's something that can be done accurately, and the two of those combined create the sum total, just like the cause and effect constantly create a sum total. There's a balance to it. There's an awareness of it. Yes, that is a problem, and yes, there is something I can do. And yes, the thing I could do might actually solve that problem. Not because I have a fantasy about it and I'm going to fix everything and do it for everyone, but because I'm actually looking at it and saying, yeah, the tire's flat. If I fix the flat and put air into it, I won't have to put more air in it rather than constantly pumping air in, thinking that's the solution and never fix the flat. That's the idea of addiction, is that we're constantly pumping air in and never fixing the flat. We're dealing with the symptom. We're fixing the symptom and the effect rather than looking at the cause.
Great analogy.
So if you finding the cause, or let's just say
It's not lost.
well, I know, but so is that just living in the cause, basically?
Well, it's just recognizing choices. As far as I can tell, choice is will.
Okay.
Every choice we make, we want something. That's our will. That's the self-will. If what I'm making those choices on is a self that doesn't exist, I'm going to make sick choices that are going to hurt people, including my own experience. Period.
Right.
So when I start noticing, 11th step, it says sought through prayer and meditation to improve, not to get a contact, to improve my conscious contact. What's that? To improve the way I think about this awakening that I'm having, which is I'm awakened to the fact that there's something here all the time. It's always there. It was always there. It was there when I first thought it wasn't there in the first step, like we talked about yesterday, Loretta.
Yeah.
We always know better. We just didn't think we knew better because we were relying exclusively on thinking. We think we didn't know, and we think it wasn't a choice, and we think alcohol caused it to, no bottle or cup ever got up off the table and poured itself down my throat. And I never saw it happen to anyone else. It always included this clever little maneuver. That's a conscious effort to take that step. So when will, second half of the first step, asking only for God's will, why would that be if there's anything else? Why would we be starved by not asking for everything if that wasn't all there is? Asking only for God's will and the power to carry it out. Why? Because my power that I think I have is empowering lies. It's empowering things with no substance and thinking they have substance because I think they have substance, which they don't. So I'm asking for that power to be my expression so that in the next step, I can carry the message, try to carry the message, and practice principles in all of my affairs, not just when it comes to alcoholics, drug addicts, gamblers, Al-Anon, sex, food, whatever the program is. It's all my affairs. What does that mean? Everybody, everywhere. Bill's original 12 steps said, we tried to carry this message to others. What's the message? There is a solution. What's the solution? As Bob talked about, love and service. What's our service? To express the knowing absolute nature that we have naturally. That's our job. That's what thoughts are designed to do. Express reality and truth, not conclude it, not come to their own decision about it.
Mhm.
They're there to express it, just like the cows do their job and the horses know what to do. They don't sit around in a depressing state. If they're being beaten by someone outside of them, they could be depressed. But they're not creating the inner turmoil because they're not thinking about their thinking, because they're simply doing what they know to do based on their design. Our design allows us choice, free choice, so free as to be able to choose things that seem to condemn us while they're illusory, but when we think they're real, become delusional ideas that are insane. Mental health depends on good information in, good information out, like computers. Garbage in, garbage out, they say in computing systems. And even computers with good information occasionally need a reboot. They need to be reset. They need to have things put back in order. Our recovery is being able to relax. We're not relaxed when we're in constant chronic anxiety. It's hard to sleep, and when we do, it's not good sleep. It doesn't help us recover. Sleeping, apparently, from what I read and heard recently by a doctor, they think that it washes away the information we don't need anymore to give us more room for new information. And if we're constantly not getting that washing, talking about memory, Arliss, if we're constantly not getting that washing, we feel overwhelmed and like we can't take it anymore because it becomes too much. We're not designed to have to comprehend everything. Everything already knows everything is already known. Doesn't need me to come to that conclusion. And by letting that thought go, I realize I'm already a part of everything, naturally. My body was created out of it. I'm of it. I don't need to get to it. And where is it? Wherever I am, wherever you are, wherever anything is, and where everything that doesn't even seem to be is. Doesn't require us to come to terms with it in any kind of intelligent, academic, word-based orientation to know it. We know it because we know it. Like we've been talking about those near-death experiences. People witness, as Jana said, a welcome, accepting presence. Nobody said, well, the guy he was 5'9". They're not identifying him like a culprit in a crime. People just said, there's an awareness that's very clear and very obvious that I felt perfectly at home, perfectly at ease. That's our natural state that we obstruct and avoid by preoccupying ourselves with thoughts about it that aren't true. We do not need near-death experiences, but what do most of us do to get to the point we finally admit we have a problem with drugs and alcohol? Wait till the conditions are so intolerable that we finally admit it isn't working. Like, no shit. That wasn't a revelation. It was just finally an admission. A bottom is realizing you can look up. It's just recognize we have them every day to the degree that we think we're going to burrow deeper into these ideas because we feel defense about them. Naturally, the lies are based on defense and fear. The whole concept of ego Ego isn't the problem. It's thinking it's who I am that's the problem. If it's an image of my thinking, it's accurate. When I think it's myself and who I am, it is inaccurate. It's a consequence of the thinking I do about the things I'm thinking of, not a consequence of the thought thinking. It's my choice in relation to those things that gives me that sense of condemnation. And it's an accurate sense, not because those things are condemned as though they lived, it's because the thought they ever lived is condemned. There's no basis to an ego that doesn't have any basis. There's no self to die. I can't kill the self if it never existed. All I'm killing and afraid of letting go of is facing the fear I've been maintaining for so long in the thought. That's all it is. Now imagine being so afraid to face those thoughts that we discount an absolute knowing awareness that we always have and operate only on the basis of what we think. How depleted and depreciated are we as a species in our capacity to feed people and be generous and be kind enough to allow them some room to operate, compared to how good we've gotten at oppressing and suppressing and killing people for not thinking like us?
Yeah.
It's as quick as looking at that. Henry Miller said, all the world needs is a change of heart. It's that simple. And the idea that it's complex are all the ideas that we cherish and idolize as being truth and reality that we've been clinging to for our survival, which have in fact been killing us, literally wearing our bodies out. Dis-ease is a lack of ease. It's simple. We don't need to wait till we're terminally ill to admit it.
So if we're in a situation where, you're really literally being described by another person as to who you are, this is not a choice that you're sitting there. I mean, this is just the reality of someone else talking, right in front of you and saying, well, you think like this and this and this and this, and then you do this and this and this and this. I'm trying to get out of the, I don't know if it's a habit or reacting in my head as being defensive, So.
You're trying to avoid the defensiveness?
I shouldn't be defensive.
Really? When you're defensive, you shouldn't be defensive?
If somebody's telling me or cutting out
Loretta, stop. Before you launch in the direction. Question, if you're being defensive, you're saying you shouldn't be defensive. Do you see the conflict in that?
No.
You don't?
I see freedom in that because there's no reason to be defensive in the first place.
But aren't you reinforcing the defensiveness by denying you're doing it? There isn't, if there's no reason, think of that. You're right. Except there are plenty of reasons that you're using to justify doing it if you're doing it. There is no good reason, but there are plenty of reasons you're using to be doing it.
Well,
if you're defending.
I want to do it.
Huh?
I don't want to be.
Yes, you do.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do.
No, because
you have never done anything you don't want to do because will is a choice. And do you know why? Because we want something out of it. And we may get something sick as a result of our want because the sick thought we're basing it on wants only sickness.
Okay.
And that beginning to recognize that we always want it, it's just sick to want things that we end up claiming we don't want. But if we have them, how could we not want them to have them if we created them? The point is starting to see this in absolute terms is starting to see that there's always a cause for the effect. And when it comes to thinking, you are always the cause of that effect. You, as we discussed yesterday at length about this same issue, it's the same answer today as it was yesterday. The struggle is the investment we have in those ideas that we think are so true that anyone else is an asshole to challenge us. And everyone else is wrong, rather than, what did we conclude yesterday? This woman is giving you a chance to see clearly some of the things that you won't allow yourself to see clearly. She's allowing you to see the defensiveness. It isn't because it's necessary or healthy, but if it's happening, it's happening. And if it's sick, it's sick. And if you're reacting to sickness, it's because you're maintaining sick thoughts. We never react to things we're not doing because we wouldn't notice them if we weren't doing them, if we weren't thinking them, if we didn't have some capacity to imagine them. It wouldn't occur to us any more than Swahili would become clear to me simply because I decide to listen to it.
We're in trouble.
It still sounds like a foreign language, and I don't understand the topic because I'm claiming to be, I don't have any experience with it because I've denied it so long. I think it's real because of my perpetual chronic denial of these things. And I do these same things. I do not talk about this because I don't do it. I talk about it because I would like to get better at talking about it openly so that the tendency begins to dissipate within the immediacy of the recognition of it in words that actually apply to it accurately. The beauty is it's never complicated except to the thinking we do to use like camouflage to hide out behind. We're creating that. That tells me we're pretty creative. We've just been creating a fucking mess and not wanting to admit wanting to live in it. It's crazy.
You know, but what my point is, what if you just don't go there? Okay,
but why would you bring it up then if you don't go there? You're bringing it up as an issue and then asking why you can't just deny it.
I'm not. I am not bringing it up as an issue. I'm trying to, to reinforce that conversation. And I'm sorry.
You're doing that.
Well, wait a minute.
You're accomplishing that.
Okay, but
you're reinforcing it.
I think if we get the specific in the story, and I know, Jack, you don't like stories.
No, because it's not the specifics.
May I finish? Because every time I open my mouth to say something, you cut me in the middle. So
yes, that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to focus. I'm here to focus on principles, and the idea that we should become more obscured in the details is a distraction from the principle.
Jack, it's not right that you don't let people even talk.
It may not be.
After 3 sentences.
It may not be, Santiago. It may be the wrongest thing I do. But my intent in being here is to focus on principles.
I don't care about your intent. It's not right. It's not right what you're doing because the conversation cannot go. It's impossible.
I see. Well, the conversation has gone through human history and it continues. So I would rather do what I can to be an obstruction.
No, this is not a conversation. This is not a conversation. This is a monologue. This is not a conversation.
Yours or mine?
Yours.
Okay. So then I'll be wrong. I'm wrong. I can be wrong, but I still want to stay focused on principles. If we're here to talk about principles, they don't include the meandering stories that give us all the details so we can spend another 3 hours talking about the details that reinforce the problem rather than actually look at the underlying issue that generates the stories to maintain the defensiveness that we do.
May I explain you why I disagree, please?
Sure.
Okay. In my opinion, humans learn 2 ways, intellectually and emotionally. When you debate ideas, you are in the realm of intellect. When you debate the stories, you are in the realm of emotions. And when you guys, Loretta and you, have been going on in circles for almost an hour, my suggestion was maybe if we get into the story, we will find the emotional charge behind it. That was my purpose.
I got it. And I will tell you, the emotional charge is making believe that truth is true when it's a lie. That's the charge. That is the core. That is the source. That has always been the source. It has always been repulsive to humans. It has always created anxiety and fear, and it will always create anxiety and fear because principles are principles. So what is wrong applied will never work any more than the wrong size wrench will fit the bolt that it's trying to fix. And no matter how long you work, it's going to get better. We can talk about this in any number.
I don't have any objection about that, Jack, but that has nothing to do with what I was trying to raise. But anyway, I will drop.
Well, it's interesting,
the
Santiago,
issue.
that you're right. It has absolutely nothing to do with that, because what you're talking about in terms of the story has nothing to do with reality and truth. It's trying to perpetuate the reality of a story as being real, which it isn't. It's just a narrative that we use to justify our own inability to face the consequences of our cause in thought. That's it. That's all they're ever used for, unless they have a moral. And I would say 98% of stories used are immoral, because they're always trying to excuse what we're doing. They're always trying to come up with some new justification that becomes the new habituation and the new excuse to continue to do the wrong thing, and wonder why it seems to happen over and over again. Why does this keep happening to me while we're in the face of new people, new places, and new times? Because the problem is the same problem.
Because it's two parts to learning: the intellectual and the emotional.
There's
And
no
the
part to
emotional
knowing.
only. All right, Jack. Thank you.
There's no part to knowing. And in an absolute knowing sense, there are no debates, and there is no opinion, and there are no options, and there is no condemnation. It's beginning to see that that is our fundamental basis in existence, not what we think about it. We've been trying to sort the thinking about, and there's all kinds of opinions and academic theories and philosophical considerations. Volumes, thousands and millions of volumes have been filled, and yet we have the highest overdose rate in history. We have the highest suicide rate in history. Addictions at an all-time high. Mental health in the world is at an all-time low. And we're still trying to tell the story better. I'm not interested in the story in that regard. I will challenge it and stand up to it, not as a fight, Santiago, but simply as a claim that the basis of our knowing is not in the thinking we do. It's not in the getting better about how we think of it. It's in the noticing that we already know better, or we wouldn't feel so clearly wrong when we're wrong. And we wouldn't see everyone else as wrong when we're ignoring the wrong that we're each doing in our own experience.
Santiago, I hear you about intellectually and emotionally. I really do. But maybe, can I tell you, I don't really have a story that I'm referring to. I just have examples of how to recover. So I'm not really necessarily talking about a story of something that I'm doing. I'm just trying to.
No, you are. You're doing it right now.
Well, whatever. I'm talking about.
No, let's not talk about whatever. Let's talk about what's happening. You and I had this conversation yesterday for an hour and a half and came to a very, very clear understanding. And yet it's the same problem today. Anthony and I have gone through this. If the problem is looked at as something that's temporary, as a fix, it's going to continue. If the principles are seen as absolute and never changing, the stories dissolve. They just vanish. Okay. And the fact is, to some degree, you are making believe, like I make believe to any degree that I'm in turmoil, that the stories are true.
Okay.
And they are.
Jack,
the opinions are true.
You're right.
Is that the difference between treating the symptom rather than the ailment?
Yes, the cause. Yes. Think about it. We always talk about how to stop the problem. You never hear somebody say, let's look at starting. Let's look at the starting for the most part. And you know where the solution is? In the restarting of the problem, not in the stopping of it. Stopping of it is treating the symptom. Alcohol did that for me. Drugs did that for me. Denial does that for me. It doesn't solve the problem, though. It gives me an impression that it's solved for a moment. And then I get back to the sickness because I've denied the cause, and I'm getting better and better at pretending that what's actually happening isn't happening, because I'm never thinking about the cause. I'm always thinking about fixing the symptom. That's what the addiction is that obsession to constantly want to know it all so we can come up with some new solution. And that's how humans have operated now, as long as humans have operated, and justified through self-indignation and righteousness that killing other people is justified.
Well, plus, if you're telling yourself a story,
yes,
then you are in a story.
Well, consider that anything we're doing not to concede the absolute nature of existence is largely storytelling. Okay, because there is no voice in an absolute knowing. There is no story or narrative at all. It's the sum total of everything happening. What's the story? It's happening. That's it. It is so complete and so whole. There is no story in it. Stories are always a tellings about things that aren't happening. You never tell the story about the moment. There's no story in the moment.
Well, that's what I just said a while ago. I said there is no story. It's
Yes.
about recovery.
Yes, but my sense is you were telling a story about the no story.
No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was. Yeah,
Loretta, you can always beg to differ. And I am not trying to claim to know this all in words that are effective enough to convey it. I'm in my thinking words. I fail in that. And this process for me has been working on getting better at that conversation for the sake of being able to engage with humans on a basis that's solid and absolute, rather than one that continues to flounder in all of this mealy-mouthed conversation that we've been having for centuries and millennia and eons. It doesn't have we have no obligation to continue it. It's an addiction to the thinking about it that continues it. And
that's exactly what I was trying to say. There is no
Be
freaking story.
constructive here, and to see if we can communicate with each other. Do you
notice,
remember,
though, Santiago? Notice how reactive.
I noticed that you don't let me finish one line. Let me finish, and then you talk.
I got it. But I want to use that opportunity.
Oh my Lord, you are relentless.
Yes,
Put the opportunity.
I am persistent.
Take a note of the opportunity and tell me about the opportunity later. Let me finish my thought, please. Jesus, may I?
Do you notice the reactiveness?
But what reactiveness? You are punching me in the balls, and you don't want me to say, "I."
It's an interesting narrative, but it's not actually happening.
Oh my Lord!
Are you being punched in the balls right now? I would understand that better. I would understand that better if it were happening.
It was a figurative speech, you know.
I understand.
Anyway, what I was going to say. May I say what I was going to say? Oh, you okay? Go ahead, finish, and then let me tell you what I want to say. Okay?
Santiago, it's worth noting that the reactiveness is so easy to generate by simply staying focused on something that isn't an argument, that isn't debatable, that isn't an option, that isn't a choice. And so my job in having initiated this conversation between us is to focus on that lack of choice and that absolute nature.
Okay.
And I know that it causes reactiveness, but it's worth noting the reactiveness in the conversation.
Okay, we already got it. I got it. May I tell you what I was going to tell you?
I know you do.
See if we can communicate. Okay.
We'll see.
Remember the story of my cleaning woman?
Yes.
Remember that day during that meeting?
Yes.
I think through the story, we found an aha moment. That's what I think, that sometimes through stories, you find an aha moment. That is the example that I want to give you. And now do with whatever you want with it.
Yes. Well, was there a principle behind that story, Santiago?
I am take it for what it's worth for you.
No. I'm going back to what you're bringing up. Was there a principle behind that story? There was no principle? Wasn't it interesting that when we clarified the conflict of
Jack, if it's principle or no principle, it's not the point. My point is stories sometimes us have the aha moment, and that's all. If you think that this, I understood that you were saying stories are worthless.
No. I'm saying that if we're using them as excuses, they're helping justify us continuing to do the thing that we claim to want to stop. And that would be a sickness. That would be using them in the exact opposite. There's nothing wrong with stories. There's nothing wrong with insanity.
The cleaning woman.
How about this?
The cleaning woman was not a
Hang tight, Everett. Do you remember what came out of that, Santiago?
An aha moment that everything was made in my head.
Yes. Yes.
And
And
I
do you
saw it
remember
so
what
clearly.
happened as a consequence?
And I saw
of
it
that
so
realization?
clearly, and I saw it more clearly than if I would have read a philosophical book based on that. That's
Yes.
the difference
Yes.
between learning intellectually and learning emotionally.
No, I would say that's intuitive because you were actually conceding that the issue you were creating was in your own thinking and you started seeing clearly. And what happened? All of the fears
I
you
think
had
we,
thought of.
I think we all see clearly, because
Yes, you're right.
when one of us gets free, helps the other to get free.
Yes,
If I get myself free, I help you to get free. So
exactly.
that is the value of a story. That's the value of a story that you negate.
I'm not negating it. I'm negating the idea that we go into lengthy
That's what
stories.
I understood. That's what I understood that you said, and you shut me down because you told me, don't, I am not interested in the story. Anyway, I just let it this stay and we talk about it next.
Well, you brought it up. I'm going to talk about it. The essence of that realization wasn't new. You just finally conceded that everything you were doing was in your own head. And none of the fears you imagined were realized. And she actually came to you and did something so unexpected, just like the other gentleman you were talking about that day that you'd had an issue with, ended up coming up to your car while we were in the midst of this and getting back to the root of saying, look, you're just making it all up. It's all fantasy. That is a story. Fantasy, by the way, is a story. You were making it all up. You saw the worst case as a result because you were doing the worst thing in your own idea about it being true. And when that went away, that guy that you were afraid you had done something to came up to your car window and said he was so happy to see you.
And by talking about the story, you unveil the reality.
Okay.
That is why
all right.
the stories are important.
Beautiful.
Not to
beautiful.
find an excuse.
Knowing
Not
that,
to find an excuse. Okay.
knowing that now, just like knowing that 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 or 1 + 1 is 2 would mean never having to tell a story if you're actually getting the principle of that story and what it led to accurately. Because stories would all of a sudden become what I'm explaining to you, they're often used for as excuses to justify continuing to deny things because you've got all kinds of rationalizations about those things. If there's any principle in that, it's seeing that beneath that thing you thought was so true and accurate in your worry and woe about those two situations, there was nothing to worry about but the worry you were doing about those things. It had nothing to do with the story and everything to do with the actual manufacture of that story.
That is precisely why I was suggesting that Loretta tells about the story, because we've been talking about her issue for an hour in an intellectual way. And I thought that if we bring the story, we will be able to reach the aha moment faster. That's all.
I see.
Is an example of a story with a principle, if you allow, when you're driving, if you allow people, if you allow people to cut in front of you, you can never be cut off. Or if you allow people in, that you can't ever get cut off.
Well, if you cut them off constantly, that wouldn't happen either. So,
yeah, if you're able to, I guess.
Yeah, but the point is that if we're talking about principles and we're here to do that, it might be worth actually focusing on the principles rather than all the varied ways we can get there when we're always there. We're there now. We're absolutely here now. We've spent 2 years in a conversation. We spend little of the conversation focused on an absolute nature and our shared absolute state of being, and a lot trying to figure out how to get there. We're there now. Always have been, always will be. There is no other place because it's not in time or space. It's an absolute present nature. It's the same thing people witness when they have these near-death experiences and seem to have to have near-death experiences to get beyond the thoughts that they think are who they are before they actually witness this absolute state of being. My suspicion is we do not need to get near it or kill ourselves or become incapacitated because we overdose to have those experiences. They are with us right now. We are there now.
Do you think that we feel compelled to tell the story because we think we're so unique or our situation so unique, which then leads to like it's our egotism?
Mm-hmm.
I think it creates a play and a narrative and a characteristic and all that. I think of defective characters, character defects. They're all the characteristics we take on that we think are who we are. They're not. They're stories we tell about who we think we are. That's it. Stories are told in thought. Stories are not told in reality and truth. There are no stories.
And it's our warped perspective. We're biased too with our story.
We're using them to justify not doing what we're doing. That's a problem. And that's the focus, Santiago. I'm not talking, stories forever have had morals too. They used to. You don't hear people say the moral of the story anymore. And my suspicion is it's because stories have become so emboldened as being so critical and so idealistic that we idolize the story while not realizing the storyteller is just going off in another loop of narrative to try to avoid actually recognizing that we're in an absolute present state of knowing where there is no story. And if we begin expressing that, the stories about it would be magnificent. Rather than justifications and how we can finally escape this peril we're continuing to create by maintaining the idea that the story is going to get us out of it.
Exactly.
And can we learn? Yes, absolutely. Does it take pain? No, not necessarily. Do we seem to require it? Yes. That's insanity, that we constantly use pain as an excuse rather than see that it's always telling us something is wrong. Always. That's only what pain does. It's not reality. It's not truth. We don't need to go through pain to get to freedom, to get to peace. It's a choice we're making that's so sick that we think it's part of our heritage and there's nothing else we can do. Imagine the stories we could tell being free of those sick stories that would enlighten people in ways to send, which are often told, that send them off in directions well beyond their thinking.
You know, it's funny, my husband will tell me, and this is absolutely true. He'll, if I'm talking about a situation and I add the details, which to me is a very form of obsessive thinking, he'll always say, you're making up stories. And, I stand back and look at the situation and it's the truth.
Yeah. So he would be helping you while you may consider him an asshole for doing it. And very often when our thinking is turned around, the people who are giving us the most help are actually being seen as the greatest antagonists and the greatest irritants. And
would you say you're all theoretical then, Jack? If you don't want to hear a story, then you're all theoretical then, right? Is that true?
Who I am all or you are all?
Your teaching style would be all theoretical because you don't want to hear any real world story. So it's all theory.
No.
If reality's reality, that's not a theory. And my words aren't truth and reality. My words are only pointing at what you all already know.
But just as a teaching style, I'm just wondering to clarify that. Are you all theoretical?
I have no idea what it even that.
Anthony, I don't think that's the way we look at. First of all, great to see you, but I think because it's the story is less. It's kind of like a newcomer, right? A newcomer comes into the rooms, and I anyway had lots of stories, but at the end of the day, it had to do with what we know when we're getting sober. Like the stories didn't make a difference. Like what my girlfriend said, that I lost my job and all, what brought me to get to the room, but it was that I was in the room. Now let's start facing what's causing all this havoc in my life. Do you know what I mean?
The story isn't the problem, though, as Santiago pointed out. It's not the problem. It's using it as though it's so true that we need to fight for everybody understanding every last detail. And if somebody doesn't want to listen, when there's really nothing to listen to, by the way, there's really nothing to listen to, because I can't possibly have their experience where they witnessed replicated in the words they used to try. They would have to talk for another 40 years for me to even get close to the experience they had. So there's people say you don't listen. And I say, well, you're not saying anything. There's nothing to relate to that that would give me the relation to it that would be sufficient to confirm it? And why is it so important, if people are so confident in their stories, that they need it to be heard by somebody else? The fact is, we're trying to relieve ourselves of the burden of continuing to tell it because it's a burden. When it is a burden, it isn't because stories aren't wonderful and can't be. They're extraordinary. I mean, Shakespeare was a great storyteller. But in all of it, he asked people to look at themselves and look at the exact same thing we're talking about here. And he did a really good job of it. And I wouldn't say we do a job quite as well, or I wouldn't be pointing it out as clearly. If we're killing ourselves over this stuff, it is worth mentioning.
But I think Shakespeare, I don't know if he's a good example or if he's a perfect example, because Shakespeare never spoke. He spoke in feelings. It's weird. He doesn't speak in specifics. He speaks in pictures almost that evoke something that's very primal in us.
Yes, our feelings, which are reflections of our thoughts. Douglas.
So I heard a guy in a meeting yesterday said we always come up with these poetic little thoughts or little phrases. And he said, my story got me here, your story kept me here. And I thought, well, now that's interesting, because it was in the line of thinking that we're having right now, it was my misunderstanding and torture of myself into that ultimate realm of incapacity and unacceptable existence that got me here. And it was really the understanding that you had discovered that everything was really all right that made me stay here.
Yeah.
You actually gave me the message that everything is really okay.
Yeah.
And you know why is that? You know why is that? Because when you discover the lie behind the story of somebody, that is much easier than discover the lie behind the stories we fabricate for ourselves. When you discover the lie behind the story of somebody, then you said, maybe my story is a lie too. That's why we stay for the stories of the others.
I'm trying not to, I'm not, I tell you, I've heard lots of people's stories and have been asked to tell my story. It as my history. That is my journey, describe my path, the pathway to get to wherever I am right now. And wherever I am right now is not necessarily a perfect understanding of everything that's happened to me or everything that's going on right now in the world. It's just my story of what I think about what happened and what's happening.
Yeah.
Not necessarily what is happening. It's only thing that is part of it that's what is happening is my telling the story right now. That is happening.
And that's where the struggle is. That's exactly
Yes.
where the emotional struggle comes from.
Right.
So one of the points, though, to think about, clarification, if the absolute is absolute, then one way to see what we think are relative things as absolute is starting to let them be as they are and notice, like you just said, what's happening is happening. Doesn't matter what I think about it, it's happening. And that's all I need to conclude to notice that. And if what's happening is happening, it is perfect because there's no conflict in what's happening. When you compare something to itself, there's no conflict. When you compare something to anything else, you're going to have more or less of that thing thought of. And that's what our ability to rationalize, justify, compare, contrast, analyze, weigh, all the things brains do are capable of that. It's not to say we should not be doing that thing, but to start noticing that that is the thing thinking does. It isn't truth and reality. Until I think it's so true and real, I'm going to stake my life and my experience on it and wonder why I'm depressed and anxious and full of fear. That's it. It's so simple. Thoughts are designed to meander and to consider.
Why do we have to have a story in the first place?
Thank you. Why? Because we have gotten good at using them to justify how we're thinking.
Listen to everybody's story because they're all the same to me. You know, I'm sorry, but it's like
anything we think that isn't true is a story.
Well,
They're only held in stories. They're only held in narratives that need to be developed so we can have a form going on in our head and a play going on that isn't fun. It's
right.
work and it's defensive.
Exactly. And it's almost like, I don't understand that about in AA is why, to tell your story. And, to me, it's like, why not tell you
No,
about.
it doesn't say that.
Well,
It
okay.
says in one place to tell your story, tell somebody your whole life story, which is important to do during
I
life.
don't
But
bother.
it
You know
says,
what? I don't bother with that because mine's too boring.
but the book says we tell our story in a general way, what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. That general way is an arc, showing people what Santiago was pointing out, that there's a beginning, middle, and an end. I don't know that we need to suffer through the 2-hour stories here to get to that point. If we know that point, we can simply concede the point and know that if we're starting it, we don't need to, we're already at the end. To see the principle is to see that the beginning and the end are together, and that to think of the end as something to fix without seeing the beginning is to have an impossibility in your own attempt to do something about it. That's what addiction is.
Right. Well, I decided to sing my story. So I'm gonna, not put you through that, but it's smoking,
Loretta,
drinking.
I tell stories too, and I do it here. And nobody Santiago has been one of the few people. Nick and Santiago are the only two people in 2+ years that told me to get fucked because they were pissed. And in my experience, that was as honest as anyone has ever been here to do something that is very seldom kept to oneself when I'm sure other people thought that same thing.
I want to thank.
I am happy and confident to know that other people had that same thought.
I want to thank Santiago though for bringing for his honesty in bringing all this up, because the subject that we're talking about is it happened organically, and it's so poignant. I certainly understand Santiago's point of view really, really well, but I really understand your point of view really well. And what's really cool is because that's the struggle actually that I have in my head often.
Being honest does not mean only telling the truth, does not mean only being right, does not mean not saying what's wrong and not saying what isn't true. It means what's happening. If I am thinking things that aren't true, that are happening, and I talk about them, the alignment of my thinking in relation to them relieves me of that seeming burden rather than complicates it any further. And I want to make a dent in that defensiveness by making it clearer so that when we step away from this discussion, we notice how we're reacting in relation to what other people think and what's happening around us, and the instances we're creating to begin to claim it's the intent of our own thinking that's causing the issue. It's not the other people. If there's any remedy, it's to start embracing and including rather than excluding and repelling. And we as humans are repulsed by lies because we know they're the worst thing we can do when it comes to choices, because they will never work and they have a corrosive effect on everything that we do. And if we weren't based in truth and reality, I would say that would never be the case, because being wrong would be the high point and being as bad as we could get would feel the best it can. And there are not many people that do that and feel that way. I've never had somebody come to me and said, I want to feel worse and I want to work on developing more negative thoughts. Why would that be if what we were harboring wasn't worse and negative? We recognize it by wanting to be done with it, and then we fight it and maintain it and wonder why we can't get over it, rather than simply say it's what we're doing now and the thought we're having about it that's either going to perpetuate it or begin to acknowledge it accurately and honestly and say, wow, I'm really up to something I don't even think I'm doing. That's interesting. Talk about interest, Loretta. That to me is fascinating when I make those concessions, because I have the world open up rather than think I'm fighting it.
Right.
Say, wow, how far I have gone, for how long I have done this, and I can feel the heartache over it. start to become aware of it rather than think of it as something to avoid and run from.
Well, it's the open mind, the willingness to have the open mind to be wrong, right? Yeah. Does that make sense?
No, we don't seem to need an open mind to be wrong.
I do. I do.
No. If you're wrong, you're wrong. You don't have to have an open mind to be doing that any more than you need to think God is God for God to be God, or an infinite source to be an infinite source. The point is, if we're doing it, it's just a miscalculation of our thinking. And then to think it's something we shouldn't be doing is the idea that fighting it is going to somehow help us survive when we create the internal conflict that we're actually is diminishing our capacity to function. Even in the law, they allow for diminished capacity to claim someone isn't guilty for doing something they did because they didn't have the mental capacity to pay attention to what they were doing. We recognize this diminishment openly and yet think of it as something happening only out there with other people rather than seeing it's happening immediately here. To any degree, I think I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And the idea that I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing is the idea that I can't be doing what I'm doing when I'm doing what I'm doing. And that's pretty insane to imagine that what I'm doing, I can't be doing. When I work about impossibility of the future, that's an impossibility in the present. Why wouldn't I create impossible consequences in my future as a result of that? I would bore a hole into the future with that same impossibility, imagining that can even be true. Resolving it is seeing it will never be true. I am always doing what I am doing. I am always doing what I am doing when I'm doing what I'm doing. Always, 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 always. And any story I tell about that is not worth listening to or not worth taking the time. And if you don't have the time for that story, I would call you wise rather than a bad friend.
Well, I just sing it, Jack.
What's that?
I just would rather sing it.
Yes, but it is a song compared to a dirge where it's celebrating the funeral and death of these ideas is seeing that they never had any life. And all they've been doing is thinking they did in an insane delusional form of mind. That's it. And it isn't even in mind. It's just in my thinking about it that I think is a mind that I'm condemned to. There's nothing to it more than that. Ever. Never will be. Ever. So the question that's come up before, Anthony was here, I know, once, and we got into this a little bit. Knowing, if we know, we know, and we're aware, what is different now, or what is possible now compared to what we would normally think is possible? And this is the beginning of starting to see if we share something that's infinite, you and I, and all of us, and everything, everywhere, possibility takes on a whole new dimension because it has no dimension to it at all. It has no beginning and no end. It becomes what the present moment is, which is not in space or time, because if it's always new, it has no continuum to operate from. It has no end. It's always beginning. It's always new. What does that mean? All possibility is always possible. What's possible now? To continue to think the exact same way I've been thinking for my whole life is possible. Does it make sense? Like you talked about, Loretta, do I have interest in doing that? No, once I see that there's no dividend paid and that the dividend paid is pain and depreciation and harm, I start seeing it accurately and say, sure, that's a choice, but it's not the best choice I can make. Now what would I do? Now what would we do?
Well, finding out what I know.
That's a question, by the way.
Well, finding out what I know allows me not to have to think about what I know.
Well, that's already the case, so you don't have to find it.
Right.
So the question is, why do you think you don't know? And I would say those.
I don't think I don't know.
Okay. So then I probably won't be hearing much from you.
For some reason.
Well, I can always make up a story.
Exactly. But it's funny to laugh at the fact we can do that rather than cry over the insistence it's the only thing we can do. And we need somebody to listen to it before we let go of it.
Exactly. I know.
When you're ready to make a story, I will be here for you.
You know what, Sophie,
Thank you.
I hope so.
I'm going to start to assign the roles for everyone.
You said something.
Go ahead.
No, the thing that you said, you made an example about someone operating on diminished capacity. And it made me really think about the fact of how long all of us have operate and continue to operate on diminished capacity.
Yes.
And that is, it actually is, it's really, I want to say scary. You know what I'm doing outside. You know what I'm doing in terms with the tech stuff I'm working on right now. And when you think about how one is able to weaponize a narrative, and then feed that narrative to a community or a person with diminished capacity. But let's define diminished capacity. It doesn't necessarily mean someone who's mentally handicapped. It's you and me.
No, it does. If you break your leg, you're handicapped. It's, you know what we're afraid to admit, Everett? That we're actually insane to be doing this. We think it's interesting that we get a runny nose and say we're sick, but when we have running thoughts, we say we're fine.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. We are insane to the degree that we do these things and think that we're mentally healthy because we're promoting an image that we're all fine and we're good. And
that's really the point that I'm trying to make, is that we think that we're fine. And all of us are and actually, I think it was Shakespeare who said that we're all running around in different degrees of insanity. That and some of us are more functioning with that insanity, and others of us need to be institutionalized and are being institutionalized by someone who has a little lower level of insanity. Does that make sense?
So yes, but the idea that we are better because someone else is worse is another sick idea, because we're seeing only what they're doing and thinking is what's worse, when in fact, if it's delusional, they have the same basis we do, and we're comparing ourselves again to what we're thinking about them rather than who they actually are. So part of it is starting to see that the principles don't change. The functional capacity, my sense is, if I've learned anything in this process, and I hope that I have, but I know that there's a lot that I seem to fail in, is that we have a functional literacy as humans because we're given a lot of environmental information, especially from our own body language, that if we read accurately, leads to our functional capacity being realized. Not our dysfunctional capacity, which we're already very good at claiming and mastering and telling the story of and telling the woe of, and the chance that we can't get out of it and I don't know how to stop it, while we continue to insist on starting it. So that functional capacity is realized between us by recognizing it's an absolute state of knowing that we already have. So we know, we're aware. And the question is, why do we not act like it? And the answer is because we don't think it's ours. We think it's somewhere else, sometime else, for someone else, that someone else has it because we look better, they look better, all those kinds of, rather than see it's impossible in an infinite space or realm not to have equality, indiscriminate, indivisibility. And indivisibility means we don't have to see it for it to be. We don't have to understand it for it to be. We don't have to think it's reasonable for it to be all that is. It is, as we are now, regardless of what we think. So any imposition, any impression, any depression is being caused by our thinking wrongly and our maintenance of those thoughts. Impressions lead to depressions as they're maintained longer and longer.
So
go ahead, Loretta.
I'm sorry, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm already off it.
I have to be like,
Anthony?
there can't be anyone around me.
Jimmy?
I'm trying to see whose mic that
please
is.
Jimmy, please mute.
Sorry.
Loretta?
Okay, well, so basically, what I'm hearing, I need some clarity here, but what I'm thinking, what I'm hearing, I need to clarify something. So if you are on the bridge of reason and your reason is your God, you're never going to make it over to the land of hope.
No, you're already there. You're just making believe insanely that you're not.
In the book, in We Agnostics, it refers to the bridge of reason, right?
Yes.
Okay. So so that being said, the bridge of reason can become your God. Like you have to reason absolutely everything. So once you can get rid of that and let God be God, you can go ahead and jump over to I don't know how it refers to it, to the.
You're not going to get rid of reason.
Well,
Because
no,
that's what thoughts do.
but if it's your God, if it's your God, everything has to
Again,
be
you're
Okay.
defining thinking thoughts are true. That's what you're defining.
right.
Yes.
Right.
So all of a sudden, reason and understanding become infallible. And all
Right.
of a sudden, we become very anxious when we don't make any sense.
Right. That's what I'm talking about. Because
Yes.
we don't make any sense anyway. So we have a power greater than ourselves that makes that sense for us. And
We can make perfect sense. We've been making perfect sense all along. You know what the sense we've been making is making no sense. That's
exactly.
perfect. It's a perfect
Okay.
reflection of thinking in terms that aren't true. Santiago.
Guys, I'm gonna jump out and go and tell my stories in a piece of paper. Thank you very much, Jack. Thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank
blessed
you,
week,
Santiago.
and don't arrive anywhere because you are already there.
Thank you.
Tiago.
Thank you. Thank you.
I
That's a
actually
nice
have to drop
period.
off.
Bye, Santiago.
I actually have to drop off too. Thank you so much for my morning, guys.
Ty, good to see you. Thanks, everyone.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Okay.
So, Loretta and everyone, Bill Wilson struggled. What he created to me was a masterpiece of divine insight,
Mhm.
but he still struggled mentally with depression his whole life. And my sense is he spoke to and pointed to what we're talking about in absolute terms. He talked about the absolute, infinite, unlimited, omnipotent, all powerful. He talked about those things. He said, make a God of anything you want, because he knew just thinking about anything other than ourselves would work.
Wow.
We can make it up in any way. Why? As soon as we take our focus off of thinking about our thinking, all of a sudden we realize, oh, there is more. Because now that I'm looking, I see. It's not that it wasn't there, I just wasn't looking. Right? But he talked about the unlimited. He talked about completely abandoning ourselves. And yet he still talked about trying to get the ego better. In an odd way, a lot of the things we do are trying to make something that doesn't exist better. And that's a major conflict. And I'm not sure that he didn't see it, but I'm pretty sure culturally within the freedom we've created, people are still struggling with that concept because they think of it as something that's real and true. And that what we're going to do is get our ego better someday by more self-help and more prayer. When we do prayer and meditation and go to meetings every day and do all that kind of stuff to feel better, we are admitting that we're doing something worse that we're ignoring. And we're again treating the symptom. And I would say that is not healthy, and it is probably a good reason why something as spectacular as the promise of AA and the potential of AA for each of us has been proven to be so extraordinary in our own transformation, literally hasn't had an impact on drugs and alcohol in the world to the degree that the problem is worse than it's ever been. My sense is our message has been somewhat diluted, and it's somewhat now priority to people within the program to kind of wait for people to come to the program before we actually announce ourselves to those people in a broad enough way for this conversation to be conveyed to ears that are clearly starving for something worth hearing everywhere on the planet. And I would say that would be the job he originally described. And he originally saw in the hospital bed. He had a mountaintop experience where he saw this message could be carried to the world. Nobody'd ever even, it took him 6 months to get anybody to even listen to his message. And yet he saw in that moment the potential for it being possible around the world. Why? Because he was seeing in a spiritual manner.
Right.
He was seeing in an absolute state of mind. His awareness was finally pushed past all of the thinking he had been doing about what was real and true. And all of a sudden he started witnessing reality and truth accurately because it was never hidden. He just had his head between his legs.
So this is the psychic change somewhere.
Well, interestingly, that near-death, that Bruce Grayson, Dr. Bruce Grayson from University of Virginia, I think it is, who has a 50-year history now. He says, I'm a scientist. I'm not prone to believe things that aren't scientifically provable, but I have witnessed and experienced these near-death experiences. And I got his book and I've been listening to it on tape. The original experience he had was with a woman who had come into an ER with an overdose, possible suicide. And he was eating breakfast and spilled some food on his tie, and he put his lab coat on to go straight to the ER, but he zipped it up to hide the the stain on his tie. And the woman was in a coma, and her girlfriend was there, and she took her outside to talk to her. And the next day when the woman came back, he started explaining the conversation he had with the friend. And she said, I know what you talked about. He said, how would you know what I talked about? You were in a coma. He said, no. She said, no, I was there. I listened to what you were talking about and I appreciated it. And she dealt with those things. So he started saying, how could that be possible?
Philip, Philip has a hot
Philip?
mic. Philip, for you.
Somebody's got their mic. I don't know.
It's not Philip. He's muted.
He just turned it on. He's on mute now. We're good.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony. So he went through scientifically and said, well, maybe they made this up together and she knew what that girl was going to talk to me about and this, that, and the other thing. But it wasn't until he was in her room and she said, I remember you had a stain on your tie. And
Wow.
he said, she couldn't have possibly known that because it had just happened and I was doing everything to cover it up, but she noticed it. She was aware of it. So he's had a 50-year history of this psychic change that happens. And my sense is our bottoms are the point at which we have taken enough, had enough, and are completely hopeless and admit the lack of hope we have in the thinking we've been doing because it's never worked. And it's that same awareness somebody gets when they're pushed beyond their physical limits, right at the edge of death, where it seems like we need to be taken before we see things clearly. And my estimation is we do not need to be near death to notice we are entertaining death every day in the thoughts we're having that aren't true, that we are constantly using to give ourselves the impression that all that's happening is what we're thinking, while we're afraid of a lot going on around us when it's what we're creating in our own experience that we're actually scared of. And we say we're scared to death, and yet you live to tell the story. So my sense is that awareness is absolute. It's here. If we talk about it, if we begin to notice that we don't need to tear down the walls, we don't need to cross the bridge, we don't need to do anything at all, because it's all here now. The simple concession is the ultimate surrender of any fight that would give us an impression that isn't true, that we would then maintain in the name of trying to finally get there, when the fact is we're always there now. Another thing I discovered in my reading, L. Ron Hubbard, who is largely blamed for Scientology today because the organization can be caustic, when he originally wrote a book called Dianetics, and what it was about was pain. And what he learned was, and he learned it from early psychology, because this goes back to the early 1900s, that if you let somebody tell the story about their pain, every time they retell it, it changes slightly. And every time they retell it, the pain that's in it disappears, revealing that there is no pain in it, but the telling of the story. Interesting.
Right.
Now, what he realized, what happened was, is people went through this process and relieved the pain and relieved the pain. And again, I don't think we have to go through a process to be where we are. And if we're insistent on telling stories, we're just going to make up a new story once the old story is told, because we think we need a new one to fill up with pain to get to the point that we let it go. It's a choice. So what he realized was, all of a sudden, people started having experiences. As they became free, their awareness grew, and they started having experiences of having lived lives at different times that they could document, and that he apparently was able to track back, some of them in Ireland or something, where there were families that supported the contention of these people's experience that had never been to Ireland, they thought, and had never been to Scotland or whatever. And he was based in England back then. So Dianetics was about relieving people of pain by telling the story over and over again, and realizing that it was the story that held the pain, not the circumstances that originally occurred. So the new near-death experience exploration is interesting because it seems to have the same psychic change. What the doctor said was, the difference is, if it was a hallucination and based on drugs, there would be no lasting impression and no effect on people's lives other than a memory. But he said that's not the case, because people come out of these with huge shifts in their awareness and huge shifts in their impression about life. And most of them are not afraid of death anymore, because they see that there's absolutely something there that is not threatening whatsoever and does not depend on a body. What is that? Pure awareness, consciousness. What do we have now? Pure awareness, consciousness. What do? Diminish it by a preoccupation of thinking about it in terms that aren't accurate. So my suspicion is if we talk about it accurately, we will begin to witness things exactly as we do in sobriety that are beyond our imagination, that things happen that are greater than we could have imagined because we're no longer limiting imagination to what we think is all we can imagine. We're not defending thoughts that are limited, so our imagination isn't limited. We start actually conceiving of the unity of nature and the simultaneous absolute nature of nature, and it being our nature, not being distinct from it and somewhere else from it at all, being where we are. And is that contemplation? My sense is we're always in a meditative state of contemplation. We've just been contemplating things that aren't true as true, and that's made a major conflict through history because it seems to give us this fake sense of power, and that false sense of power is what ego effectively represents. A false sense of who we are. What does that mean? We seem distinguished. We seem distinct. We seem separate. We seem alone. Why wouldn't we suffer from loneliness and isolation and anxiety and stress? We're imposing it on our experience to claim we're in charge. Why would being in charge mean feeling sick if the sick charge we had wasn't sick, thinking all we were was what we thought? Who we are is what we think. Ego is based on an idea that an image we can create in thinking that's only thinking of itself. It's just thinking of itself that creates this thought. All of a sudden becomes who we are because it's all we think about. Why is it all we think about? Because its seeming life depends on constant thought. So it doesn't make it real. It makes it insane to continue. That's all. If the awareness of our awareness is what we're aware of and we talk about it, the chances are the stories we tell will give a break to, so they begin to dissipate, and trying to reinforce them by retelling them over and over and over and over and over and over again and trying to get the deal so clear that somebody finally hears it will end. And all of a sudden the conversation will be about what we can actually do rather than what's impossible to do. And I would say that would be a gift. And if we have that gift and aren't opening it, that's a choice we're making as a species, not one that's hoisted on us or weighing on us. It's a choice we're making. And I would say, given the way things are, this may be a better time than ever to make a choice, while every time has always been the best time. But we've probably created enough havoc to maybe take some responsibility for the fact that we've been at the center of some of it, if not a lot of it, if not all of it, when it comes to what we've actually done that's been damning to nature, and start to act like we're actually responsible human beings that are superior, rather than claim the damage we can do is our superiority. And that's how we pretty much lived. So is it necessary to continue? No. Is it a possibility? Absolutely. The freedom comes from recognizing that it's always possible to do anything we want. And when that is recognized in total, the chance of doing the worst thing is reduced to almost nothing, because the best thing is what we do with everyone, and the worst thing is the thing we do alone and wonder why we feel so lonely. We're trying to counter and ignore nature. We're trying to disrupt the law of order. We're trying to reverse the law of nature and order. It's impossible. And the great thing is to realize that gratefulness isn't something we conjure up. It's the fullness of greatness that we're starting to express that we're grateful for, because we're no longer not appreciating what we're doing. Most of us aren't grateful because we're not grateful for the actions we're taking that are compelling our experience in such a damning manner. It would be insane to be grateful for them, but when you begin to see them as lessons learned, we can be grateful, we can be appreciative, we can see that lessons are always possible, but we're only learning about thinking, we're never learning about knowing. The awareness is automatic because it's absolutely always been in place, because it can't be somewhere else. It can't be something else than everything that is all the time. And it isn't even all the time, it's just ever present. I mean, there's another thing. We think about forever, and yet forever never comes. That is torture. I don't want to live forever. But living ever presently isn't living forever, it's living presently. Now, it's something we can confirm while we're here. We don't need to wait to die to figure it out. We've used that as another excuse to deny what we're doing, where we are, and being responsible as we are, where we are. Morning, Jackie and Jimmy. Sturgis.
Good morning. Good to see you and hear you all.
How's the lady?
She is her. Yeah, she is. You got to come over and say hi again. She's
how old?
Something. She's a little over 6 months at this point.
Yeah.
She's been on a few planes. She's looking you right in the eye and expressing what she thinks. She's
probably looking at both eyes.
That's right. No, she's amazing. What a lesson I get every day from pure presence, as Arliss reminds me of.
Yeah. So our mission, if we have one together, is if we have a capacity to realize, it would be because we haven't realized it that we still have that capacity. And yet the ever-present nature of that possibility has always been possible. And it's certainly possible not to do those things that would be possible, but it's also possible to start considering what we can do in that broader sense. And I would say some of that is noticing that while our conversation lasts a certain period during the week, our conversation interaction with everything and everyone else lasts the whole week. As it is now, it is when we call then. And beginning.
So let's say what if somebody was upset and they said, let me tell you about my husband. He's the worst person or whatever. And you say, no, I don't want to hear a story. How would you get to their problem?
I don't need to get it. They've already gotten there. I can create my own. I don't need.
Tell me what's wrong, but I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear your story. Just tell me what's wrong. So then they would say, I feel jealous, maybe something like that. You would get to the core feeling.
If you're looking at things accurate, honest, there's no story, Anthony. And as we're willing to notice that these things that we have the potential to notice, like everything that's happening is happening, it's just always going to be that way. So if you're thinking about something that isn't happening, you're always going to be perplexed as to how to handle it. So the idea you have about somebody somewhere else telling a story about something that you're trying to figure out now, the perplexing nature is, what are you doing in the present about thinking somebody else somewhere else will have a problem and how to fix it, when in fact the problem doesn't even exist? It's not here. It's not now. It's not happening. It's a thought, though, one you're welcome to have. But to work on the solution is to think there's no solution other
That's a good point. That's a good point. We didn't talk about that.
I would hope
that the story is the past. That's the problem. You don't like with the story. You want to hear it right now. That person isn't doing. You're not running from a tiger right now. There's no right now going on.
Well, you can feel that you are because you're maintaining the story in the present. But that would be a seeming obstruction of the present when the present isn't obstructed at all. It's only our thinking it's obstructed that we're suffering from.
And then my friend too that was saying they didn't have anxiety. They're a doctor, so they realized too they're going on a medical definition of maybe anxiety, and some of it is normal. They're thinking that there is some normal anxiety where it's when you cross that line, there's a difference between having just normal anxiety and a problem.
If a car's coming at you in an intersection, you probably have some justification to feel anxiety.
Right. Situational anxiety.
We're talking here about insanity, and we're talking about an obsessive need to continue to maintain the anxiety, which becomes chronic and undermines every one of our bodily systems. Every one of our systems is designed to maintain homeostasis, and we throw them out of balance. The greatest thing we can do to undermine our body is cause stress. And people who are put in situations where they're constantly stressed, we call that torture. But we don't think of what we do to ourselves as torture. We call it self-abuse and think it's somebody else doing it. When we're doing it, nobody's having a greater impact on our own experience than each of our own thinking, or have the potential for it.
But I like that point about the story. The story is not now. That's part of the difference between a story and now.
But it's being told in the present as though it's now. So the
Right.
solution is seeing that it's what you're doing with it now that's causing the problem, not what happened back then. Remember the kid in that first, 3 or 4 years ago, Anthony, at the
Yeah.
men's retreat that we met at, and that kid
Yeah.
was talking about what his mother had done 17 years before, and he was suffering from it ever since. And I said, what she did is over. What you've been doing since then has been a chronic punishment, abuse of your own experience. And to think those things are true is an option. But the option of thinking things that are true that aren't true is that we will absolutely face internal discontent, anxiety, stress, sense of loneliness, disconnection, self-loathing, low self-esteem, low self-worth, low value, because they're all reflecting what we're thinking, not who we are. And when we think we're our thinking, we think those things tell us about us. And, oh, well, I'm just a lowly, you hear it in the program. I'm just an idiot. I'm just an alcoholic. I'm just this, that, or the other thing.
Isn't this where the principles are not optional?
Principles are never optional.
So that's what I mean. So if
Yeah.
you're going to have this anxiety and you're living in the principles,
But you've been living in the principles when you thought anxiety and truth were or false lies were real. So the ability to begin to see that we shut ourselves off to what's happening in the name of thinking that what's happening isn't happening because we don't think it's happening, and then start to think that we're not experiencing the principles, while we wouldn't be experiencing the dissatisfaction and the anxiety and the stress is our witness of knowing something's wrong. We are creating those things as evidence of our awareness of the principles. But what are we doing? Blaming those things on something or someone else in a story that isn't happening to justify continuing to do it.
Oh, that's good.
Now, Loretta,
It's good.
you and I always talk at least an hour and a half.
Oh, we do not.
Okay, 2 hours.
That is not true. He is just, no.
All right, I'll pull my phone records. I think one of the first times we spoke, we talked for 3 hours.
Oh, come on.
I'm making a point,
Okay, go ahead.
if possible. If the principles are principles, they're always principles. When you become so consumed with the thought that you think is true, that isn't true, you will think the principles are no longer there. Always. Always. So when you're always thinking they're not there, you can now start thinking they're there when you're thinking they're not always there. You can reintroduce to thought, well, they're here, I'm just not thinking they're here, and begin to assign responsibility to the action you're taking rather than the consequence you're imagining that's so big and so pervasive as to be condemning you to death. It's just a thought, period, masquerading as truth.
Okay.
And it's not the Mardi Gras. That masquerade is not the Mardi Gras. It's a horror show, typically. We're afraid. Why? Because we know better. If we didn't know better, we wouldn't be afraid. We wouldn't be anxious. We wouldn't struggle. We wouldn't be depressed. The impulsiveness of it wouldn't be to try to escape it if we thought it was right. Thinking wrong is right is a major conflict. It creates an opinion that we need to get away from it while we continue to maintain it. That's insanity. I'm running from a tiger I'm continuing to think is chasing me. I'm never going to get away. I'm creating the impossibility in life when life isn't impossible at all because it's provided all possibility.
Yeah, I'm starting to follow you. That's what's frightening. So,
well, in saying that, as we talked about yesterday, as you begin to look at stuff accurately, one of the things that becomes clear are the scary things we're continuing to maintain. Beginning to witness it is beginning to notice that we are an observer of our experience, essentially, that we are not the thoughts we thought we were. We are not the brain we thought we were. We are not the body we thought we were. We are an observer of it all. And that is our greater awareness. And to see things clearly is to start to say, wow, I'm thinking some pretty scary thoughts. To be so afraid. I'm not afraid of the infinite. I'm not afraid of having everything. I'm not afraid of love. I am afraid of what I'm doing in my immediate thinking that's causing the impact. Cause and effect are immediate ever present, like everything. Nothing happens at any other time than the present, because there is no time in the present, which is why they say there is no time like the present, because there is no time in the present. It's an absolute state of awareness that we interrupt seemingly by thinking about our thinking as all that's happening, when in fact, actually everything that's happening is still happening while we're thinking it's not. That's delusion. That's insanity. That's just a loop we're capable of taking on a joyride that isn't fun. That's it. And it's always going to be that way. That consequence is always going to be there. To think we should feel better about it is to think we should get better about denying the thought that's causing the problem. That's insanity, and that's addiction. And it isn't even addiction. It's just a lie masquerading as truth. And that's what addiction is too. Addiction is the lie of thinking there's nothing we can do about it. There's no other choice. It's the last thing I want to do, but it's the first thing I end up doing.
And you're talking about addictive thinking.
Yes. It's the idea that thinking is our sole source. And what's interesting is thinking is critical to us as humans, and we undermine its potential to serve us and protect us and operate on our basic instincts to survive and thrive, and we turn it into the greatest threat, which is why suicide is at an all-time high right now. And if this were being talked about publicly, I would probably shut up more, but it isn't. And I'm in the face of people often who are struggling to figure out how to deal with people who are struggling on our streets in LA. And then they do the exact sick thing to help them get worse and think it's the best thing they can do. The policies at the upper level that have been giving people who clearly are in need of guidance more latitude to go wrong have been coming from the upper echelons of the people in charge that have been elected to represent the people, while in fact the representation of those same people is allowing them to die at an all-time increasing rate. And finally in LA, it's finally turned a corner somewhat. But the overall discussion about the mental illness, when I bring up addiction, people say, well, there's a lot of mental illness on the street too. And I remind them, addiction is a mental illness. It's seen as something separate, so it's treated as though it can't be fixed because it's something else. And yet you're letting people who are absolutely stark raving mad, not on drugs, look like Robinson Crusoe and live on the streets in no clothes in the middle of winter and say that's the best you can do. We have a county in Los Angeles that if it were a state or a country would have the 7th largest budget in the world. And they have been overspending on solutions that have never worked and not said something's wrong here about what we're doing. What they said is, the problem's getting worse. What we need to do is spend more. It's another level of insanity because we do not talk about it openly and publicly. And AA and no anonymous program condemns us to keep our sobriety secret. All that's asked of us is that we do not mention our association to AA as a member publicly at the level of press, radio, film, and now internet. That does not disqualify us from being ready examples and voices of what addiction really means and how it can be solved and served. And my sense is there are millions of people in this country who are sober who would be happy to talk to people on the street if the conditions on the street weren't so threatening, because people have been allowed to degenerate to such a low level because they've been given more and more latitude to go wrong. People would be happy to show up and speak to them. I know thousands of them in my own neighborhood. So that is a sickness. That's a social ill. And it's all of us, each of us, all of us. Not just in LA, not just in the United States, not just in the world. Everywhere, everything is affected by what we choose to do. It isn't grandiose to consider we have an infinite source. It's grandiose to consider we don't. It's pride in reverse, as Bill talked about it. Self-pity.
Oh my goodness. I don't know why, sometimes you hear what you hear, you see what you see when you see and when you hear. But the word addiction or addictive thinking, I don't know. I don't know. I've struggled with the word addiction, but this week it's been kind of one of those awakenings of what you just said.
Do you struggle with it a lot overly and keep wanting to do it over and over like an addict?
Do what? I'm sorry.
I remember somebody at a treatment center, they were having a hard time understanding that they were alcoholic. And then finally came out, well, do you drink alcoholically? Oh yeah, I drink alcoholically. They just didn't want to be labeled an alcoholic.
I don't struggle with that. I struggle with, alcoholism being a chemical reaction and addiction being drugs. I think that.
So here's the chemical reaction of the mental obsession. The book defines it as a mental obsession, so that's what I use as the addiction. And it's the second half of the first step, which often is not understood. And I'll repeat again, Father Bill W., the link is at the bottom of the announcement every week, in Austin, Texas, does a beautiful job of explaining the mental obsession in original terms prior to the steps really even being created. So the first step can be seen accurately and looked at accurately, which makes a profound difference in how the principles are seen in the rest of the steps.
And the word unmanageability. So,
well, here's the difference. God, I just lost my whole train of thought.
I know.
Or I think I did. So the mental obsession, as the book describes it, is at the center of the disease. Right. And you were just talking about the abnormal effects of drinking. So when I drink, the abnormality, the allergy, is an abnormal response. What does that mean? I do the one thing that continues to hurt me rather than the thing that would help me. That's the abnormal response. I drink, I drink, I drink. Why do I drink? When, if I have an allergy to peanuts and eat them, and all of a sudden my throat closes and I can't breathe, and my whole head goes crazy and starts sweating, and I get, because I don't like the effect of the peanuts, but I like the effect of alcohol.
Right.
Okay. So the repulsion in thinking, when we think a lie is true, we are repulsed because it's an abnormality, and the abnormality in our experience is reactivity. What are we doing? We're reacting to it like an allergy does. And what's the reaction? Try to get away from it. What does that have us do? Act impulsively. What does that have us do? Act compulsively. Do things that are killing us in the name of trying to escape the thought we're having that's reactive and disturbing.
Okay, so I think my struggle, what I'm trying to say is, alcoholism is a biochemical genetic disorder centered in the hypoophthalmic information control center of the brain and made worse by the liver's inability to process alcohol without producing acetylidipide, which mixed with dopamine produces tetra something.
Right.
And is a nasty combination, giving the alcoholic's narcissistic, egocentric core.
But see, you hear that though. They're claiming the alcoholic's core is narcissistic and egocentric, not their thinking. The core of the person is being seen as narcissistic and egocentric. There is no narcissism or ego outside of thought. None. None. So we think it's real.
I guess this is describing both the chemical and the addictive.
Okay, but consider this, Loretta.
That's
when I am creating a thought that I think is real and true and making believe it's real and true, all of those drugs you just mentioned start to become released in my own chemical factory. And I think because I can control these drugs by doing things that counter my health, I'm getting better. When the things I'm doing is using the chemicals my body creates for my well-being and turn it against the well-being of my body. Right. I'm actually using up the things that give me the impression that I'm well and feel horrible from the thinking.
But this is alcohol. This is describing alcohol.
No.
Drugs.
No. He's describing specifically it's as a result of the egocentric, egomaniacal personality. Exactly. That's the core of it.
Right. But it's also after you do these, you drink. And like it said, my sponsor wrote this, okay? Because he's trying to explain it to me. And it's a biochemical genetic disorder centered in the hypothalamic information control center of the brain. So he's describing the chemicals that when we drink, we produce these chemicals, the liver.
And I'm describing when we think, we create those same chemicals. When we lie, we create those same chemical reactions. They may not be identical to alcohol's reaction, but the ones in the brain are identical to the threat being posed that we're
Right.
making believe is the only thing we can do.
Okay, and I'm just putting that together. That's what I'm
Yes.
trying to
Yes.
say.
Yes.
Because I think sometimes that's at least, if you ask as many questions as I do, especially in that first step, because let's face it, the first step is the one that you have to get right.
Well, you don't have to, but to do it is to do it right, because
Right.
that's how you do things, is to do them right. How you don't do things is to do them wrong. And that's why we tend to feel life is impossible, because when we're thinking what's happening shouldn't be happening, we're doing things that can't ever be realized and then think life is impossible. We take this dramatic leap to make
Right.
believe life's impossible while what we're entertaining in terms of our own thinking is impossible. Bill W., Father Bill W., I believe he's an Episcopal Anglican priest with 52 years sobriety now, said the first step, powerless over alcohol, period. What does that mean? I'm actually admitting a state that I've been in since the first time I drank, because my body is incapable of processing alcohol. My metabolism doesn't process it. Second half of the first step, that our lives have become unmanageable, is not that they were unmanageable because I was drinking. And he says, my life was a mess when I was drinking. What becomes unmanageable is life now that I'm no longer drinking, because I'm starting to look at the source of the problem as the thinking.
Right.
And what is the unmanageability of it? I can't manage something that's out of control, because a lie has no control. A lie has no presence. It has no existence. It has no substance other than what I think. So there is nothing to control. And unmanageability is that I keep thinking I can manage it, which gives it the confirmation, like my stories, that it exists.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to fix the ego rather than see that the ego is a figment of my imagination that doesn't exist if I don't think about it. It's a function of thought, not reality, not truth.
Right.
The idea that reality and truth comes from thought means that there's no reality and truth until I think. That's a little bit lopsided.
Right. He goes on to describe the addictive behavior. So it's an aha moment for me. I'm so grateful I finally got that.
Well, consider though, Loretta, that the effect of that thinking has been, people often say the relief they had was palpable when they took their first drink or drug, right?
Right.
Isn't that an indication that they've been suffering since they were 2? What are they being relieved from at 12 and 13 and 14 when they're having their first drink and they feel relief? What are they being relieved from but the mental strain? They weren't drinking before that, and yet they had something to be relieved from. Interesting that
Those parents.
What's that?
Those parents.
Whatever the excuses are the excuses made by the individual to be affecting their experience so intimately by the thinking they're doing, that they have been given free will to choose. Everybody, every child has free will. They may not like the consequences of the freedom of the will they use, because their behavior gets modified and criticized and condemned by adults, but they're basically just choosing freely what they know to do, what they want, which we're all able to do. And I would suggest we've always done. We just haven't wanted to admit it anymore. We want to admit the circumstances we create are things we want, because we'd rather be irresponsible for it, thinking that somehow that's a winning formula, rather than recognize we've been responsible the whole time. And there has been no break in the principled nature of our existence except to the thinking we've done about it. Nothing, ever. So the good news and the bad news of responsibility is that we're responsible. And that means when we make choices that don't go where they think they should, we just made bad investments. And people that make bad investments don't get returns on their investments.
Yeah, true.
And so the return we're looking for isn't there. But in mental issues, it's actually clarification, a chance to learn and say, wow, if I keep doing that same thing, I'm always going to get this result. That's good information. I don't have to ever do that again and know that. Just like I never have to repeat the basics of arithmetic to begin to understand how to do addition and subtraction and multiplication and division. Once I get it, I got it for all numbers. Boom. And yet, what do we do with those lessons? Oh no, I'm going to repeat it. And I think things will change in the world differently next time. The consequences are going to get better if I keep repeating this behavior. That's the sickness. I do it every day in some way. There is always a point at which I recognize I'm up to something that is no good. And it's a lot easier to witness it and laugh at it and diffuse it than to continue to fight it.
Yeah. So would the recovery be in being repetitive of the right?
Well, that's what righteousness is always wrong.
The right ways, the right ways, the the positive thinking, not the negative.
No, positive is based on negative.
Oh,
You know what's interesting? In the middle of both is perfect equilibrium.
okay,
Why?
well,
Because bad is based, good wouldn't be good if there weren't something to compare that was bad.
but the repetitiveness of bad is going to keep you bad. The repetitiveness of what is good or positive is going to keep you positive.
Here's the difference, though. Here's the difference. The bad always needs to be thought of to be done. We always need to think of it because we're making it up.
Okay,
The good is always available when we apply it. We could make a mistake and apply it correctly and it would work. So one is a haunting revelation of self-induced psychosis, literally. And the other one is just realizing that principles have always worked. And they've always been the basis of our existence. And they're not starting now, except for the fact that they've never ended. There's been no end to them when I didn't think they were there. And the ultimate surrender in this is just simply a concession that things have always been how things have always been. And that reality has always been reality, and truth has always been true, and what's absolute has always been absolute. And that's actually good news. That's not a threat. The only threat is to the ideas I have about what I think is absolutely true and real. And that isn't actually even a threat. It's only a threat to my continued insistence they're true.
Yeah, and the step is living in it, right?
We're always living in it.
Well, you can live in the negative too. I'm talking about living in.
We're living in it right now. We're living in the possibility of negative and positive in terms of our human experience.
Well,
There are negative ions. And nobody's telling them to think more positively.
Well, I'm thinking positive, so I don't want to think negative. You go right ahead and make up your own story.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Try this. Take off the negative charge on your battery and see how well your car runs.
I don't have a negative charge on my battery.
Sure you do. Go take it off and see how well it starts.
Well, you know what? I have one of those new things, that you don't need another car to start yours. You just put it on there. It's battery. I'm serious. It's battery operated and it starts.
If it's a battery that's operating, take off the negative charge and see if it works.
Well,
Put the batteries into a flashlight backwards. Try that. Put them in backward and see how it works.
What is your point? I mean, how can you?
Positive is connected to negative, and there is no threat in the negative, but negating its existence is where the threat becomes.
Okay.
In an absolute universe, there is positive and we're filled with positive and negative ions. There's neutrons and protons, and some are negative, some are neutral, some are positive. They function together easily and happily without discontent or disregard. They just do what they're doing, and we think it's up to us to choose them. They're ever present as they are. The wholeness of everything changing is seeing that it doesn't change.
Are you referring to quantum mechanics, or are you just referring it to generality? Just
referring to what I'm referring to. The fact that everything is together, everything is whole, everything is complete. It does not exclude anything. And in our relative universe, the piece is seeing things together rather than trying to think of them. When I think I'm only going to be good, anything that happens that isn't based on good is going to seem horrible, when in fact it's just a slight variation to my experience because something isn't quite going. If a sailor went to sea only thinking they would hit the exact dots of water and drops they thought, they would be insane and never arrive where they're going. The fact is, it's a fluid experience that's always changing in some way. And when you notice it's always changing, you can realize and admit that's not changing. So there's absolute stability in it.
Well, okay, I'm following you, but let me put it to you. Let me put it to you like this. I would rather live in the light than the darkness, Jack.
You are right now. You're there. You're there. There is no, do you know what they've realized about what we call darkness? Is that it's where the physicists, which you can ask your husband about, are realizing that there seems to be more matter in what we call dark in this space. And why we call it dark is because we don't understand it. But if it has more than there is, it's actually light. It's actually an ever-present state of light and awareness. That knowing is the light.
Right. And the darkness really pushes you toward and lights you up in the first place. You have to have darkness to have light to get the
I doubt that.
I don't.
I would imagine in an ever-present state of knowing it's absolute. You never hear somebody say, I faced a dark light when they go into those near-death experiences.
But in art, okay, in art, painting objects.
We're talking about absolute terms here.
Well, I am too. And so with that into consideration, if you put a dark line against a white piece of paper, okay, you draw a dark line, that produces the object of the light, the darkness.
You're using relative, you're using relationships, and I'm talking about absolute states of light.
Okay.
An absolute light would have no shadows in it.
Okay, I hear you.
Have you ever seen a light without shadows?
That's what I'm saying.
Have you ever seen a light with no shadows?
No.
Okay. So our relative experience, our human experience is based on light and dark.
That's right.
So, okay. But you're saying you don't want any negative. And yet the darkness you're saying is part of the light.
Well, the darkness thrust the light. Okay.
It just helps distinguish it.
Right. That's what
all.
I'm trying to say.
Okay. Now, in an absolute state of light, there is no darkness. And I would say that's the ever-present nature of our presence that we're always aware of. And if you listen to these near-death experience, that's what people witness. They don't witness. Some seem to witness pitch black and horror and fear and all that.
No, I don't.
I don't know. I'm talking about people who witness that.
Yeah. I don't do that.
There are some people that seem to experience that. I would suggest what they're really experiencing is the depths they've gone to maintain these thoughts that they haven't broken through, that they aren't beyond, that they're having an experience of that condition they've created rather than the experience of people who have that sense of being welcome. It always seems to be referred to as a bright white light. In my experience, it took me 10 years to realize that the difference in the thing I was seeing after I'd been stabbed and had a knife put in my back 9 inches deep, the thing that I saw was, I kept saying I couldn't tell if it was deep or shallow because there was no variation in the light. It was pure. It took me 10 years to realize there were no shadows. That's what I was witnessing. I got that it was something confounding to my thoughts, but I didn't realize it was the lack of shadows I was seeing. There is no sense of depth and space to something that's white light. Why? It's not in space and time. It's a complete non-dimensional experience. That's our awareness. That's our awakened state. That's the state we're always in, darkening with the thoughts we create or thinking we are.
So are you saying that our awareness is a white light? Is that what you mean when you refer to white light?
Just my experience, yes. And it seems to be common, and it seems through history, even with Rumi and Shams and people from Arliss may know better than I in terms of the history of storytelling and all that. But it's been discussed and mentioned in that way for a long, long time. It's been seen as something is absolute, which would mean there's no variation in it. Okay. It's just a present state of knowing that's, Rumi was a great conveyor of that. And Moeen, who I just did a session with, who was heading back to Iran, who grew up in Iran, was talking about Shams, who I never realized was Rumi's inspiration, who preceded Rumi in talking poetically about this natural state of being and awareness. So the point I'm making to you, if there is one, is to see that everything is in perfect balance when you just let it be whatever it is. If negative and positive are together and you only want to be one or the other, you're staking a claim in impossibility because you're already both. And so too is everything else already both. And so too are we already witnessing everything. We're witnessing everything in perfect balance, and we're staking claims along the line in the spectrum between the extremes, trying to make believe that we can create our own reality. It's a decision. It's a choice.
Well,
It creates the impossibility we witness, and then we think the impossibility is so impossible, life becomes impossible because we're not noticing we're creating the experience of impossibility by choosing to do things that are impossible. If everything's already done and we're already in the light and that's already our nature, I can't get there. I can't do anything about it. But I can do a lot to impact my experience of it that gives me the impression I need to get somewhere. When I don't think I'm where I am, what do I think? I need to be somewhere else. What else do I think? I need to have something else. What do I need? Someone else, somewhere else, something else. And you know what? It's never enough. Why? Because the problem is thinking I'm not where I am, where everything else is. It isn't because there's a lack in me. There's a lack in the thought because it has no substance. It's a denominator of zero, and I keep piling numbers on top on the numerator and thinking someday it will become whole.
and so this is
complete.
addictive thinking.
What's that?
And you're referring to addictive thinking when you describe that, right?
I would say it's an overuse of thinking. Certainly I can contemplate those things, and I'm not condemned to any contemplation, but when I think they're real, I start thinking they're absolutely necessity and the only thing I can do. And you hear people say, what else can I do? I had no other choice. That's impossible. Choice always allows not to be chosen. Always.
But the addictive thinking is you want more and you want more. You want to be in that
You want to
place
solve an impossible problem with more of the impossibility.
when you're already there.
You're creating it. The solution is saying that there's no reason for me to continue. It's the only reasons I use are sick ideas.
Right.
That doesn't mean they're reasonable. It means they're irrational, illogical, preposterous. So they become everything I use to tell the story about why it happened, because it certainly wasn't me. You got to listen to the story. Let me tell you why I don't belong where I am with all that is. I don't have everything right now, and I'm not who I am. And let me explain to you why. If you started a story that way, everybody would say, what are you, crazy? And you'd have to say, yes. And yet looking at it, you'd say, no, I'm just promoting a crazy idea that I love promoting. At least you'd be announcing it rather than claiming it's your salvation that they listen and hear you finally. Because you know why?
That's kind of the beauty of
You're
this.
not even listening to what you're doing. Why would they?
And that's kind of the beauty of this course, so to speak, is that people can and see the honesty. And so you just start being really honest with people and cutting through that facade. And they like it, which seems like it wouldn't work to be so honest, but then they appreciate it.
The freedom too, Loretta and Anthony, to your point, is that we are free to lie and we are free to be negative. And when you start realizing that, it will make no sense if you don't want to do it. You just say, why would I choose strawberry if I can have chocolate and I like chocolate? What would the justification for it? I have to have it. I have to have strawberry. I love chocolate, but I have to have strawberry.
Hey, Jack.
It was
Philip.
one of those times when a real good time seemed like a long time ago.
You want me to share my experience from earlier in the week?
Refresh me.
It's a story, yeah.
Remember I called
Especially.
you with the obsessive thinking about the girl and
Oh, yeah. That's good.
so I had noticed last
But
week.
Philip, narrow it. Try to tell it in less time than it took to experience.
Editor. No problem.
So let's get it.
Think about it. We tell stories about 10-minute events for years.
I can say a beginning, middle, and end in 3 minutes.
Three
Good.
words or three
Do that.
sentences.
Let's do that.
All right.
What did you think?
What I thought was I had gone on this date with this girl I really liked from London, and I thought I had basically messed it up or fucked it up, and that she wouldn't be interested in seeing me again because I felt tight or stiff, which is something that happens a lot of times, whether it's performing or whether it's sometimes with someone that I like. When it's someone I don't like, doesn't really happen. It's easy. And I noticed then that day and the next day, Monday, when I called Jack, my obsessive thinking like I hadn't been to a lot of meetings that last week. I hadn't been, I'd been focused on work, and I just noticed my head just spinning out of control, thinking about how many I fucked it up this way, that way. At the same time, I had the awareness to know that this is just my obsessive thinking, just ruling me right now. And what I did was, of course, I went to like 2 Zoom meetings, and I called my sponsor and a few other people, and Jack and I talked. And what Jack was able to narrow it down to was the reason I'm getting the way I am is because I have an expectation, you know, which obviously I've heard many times before, but for this particular conversation, it was really important because the reason I was nervous, or the reason I was, you know, in that kind of obsessive this time, was because I have an expectation that this particular situation will work out.
Yeah, they never have in that expectation before, but this one will be different, right?
Well,
Exactly.
So another point about that, another point real quick, Philip. Every choice we ever make, we have an expectation, every single one. So when people say they don't have expectations, isn't it ironic that they would have the expectation not to have expectations and claim that they should be taken seriously? It's like people that say I don't judge anymore. Like, well, that's a judgment.
Yeah.
So the point is, expectations always come with choices because we want something. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
When it becomes, we think the expectation is based on a thought that's true, we think the only thing that will ever happen is what we want. And that's the risk we impose in our experience.
Okay, so as a female.
Let him continue, Loretta, please.
I mean, I'll just, now we're at the middle. I'm almost at the end.
Okay.
But basically, after having that talk, going to meetings, doing what I needed to do, you know, I responded the next day to the girl and said, hey, I had a great time, blah, blah, blah. We should do it again. And anyway, make a long story short, we're going to see each other again this afternoon for a date. So what I noticed was I didn't want to act on the stories and thoughts in my head that I knew weren't real, but I thought they were real because then I knew I would turn it into reality in reality.
But do you see, Philip, how not wanting to react to them and all that is trying to pretend they're not happening rather than say, wow, I go to great lengths to create impressions that are absolutely not true, because I know that what came with all those thoughts that you had and that consequence was all the ideas you had about why she wouldn't like you, why it wouldn't work out, why she wouldn't call again, why all this stuff. All those things were immediate consequences of that thinking you were doing that was impossible. So what are you doing? Figuring out what she's not going to do.
Making up a story.
Denying what you're doing.
Yeah, I was kind of in, at the same time, I was laughing at myself of how my thinking was just completely alcoholic. And
no, it's not alcoholic. It's obsessive.
But alcoholism. Like, it was like, you know.
The essence of it is obsessive thinking. That's the obsessive of every addiction. So you have an addiction to thinking your thoughts are true and real. So you have an addiction to thinking people should only do what you want and what you originally thought they'd do and what you wanted them to do. And you think your life is at risk when they don't do those things. That's the addiction. That's what we drank over to feel better about.
What's interesting is how it also attaches to your nervous system or your body. And, you know, you start having thoughts that have feelings, and then you think it's more real because you're feeling it. And, you know, and it's like, I just was like, talking to you, sitting back and being like, wow. That's
so Philip, this is another example of you. All those indicators you just described are telling us something is wrong. And what do? Think they confirm reality. Yes. Why? Because we're continuing to maintain thoughts that are true. So what does our body do? It reacts accordingly. It doesn't have an opinion. It's taken our lead. What is our lead? Our choice. What are we doing? Chronically maintaining thoughts that aren't true. The nervous system is nervous for we have 38 miles of nerves in our system. We have a lot of nerve. To actually ignite that with fear is to feel it and not recognize the value of the benefit of that education by thinking of it as something that shouldn't be happening, shows how quickly we are to think what we're doing shouldn't be happening in our thinking. Yeah. It's an immediate response.
And for me, it just illustrated that, like, you know, no matter how, I mean, I'm coming up on 17 years, just turned 37. It's just like, I still have the disease. and I have to treat it every day. And
you still cause dis-ease by thinking impossible thoughts and think they'll be true. That's all. It isn't a disease that is you.
Yeah, I still
It
cause
is a choice you have that you continue to make chronically, thinking someday it will work. The point I was making about the alcoholic mind is starting to see that this is the mind of every compulsion. Anorexia, bulimia, overeating, gambling, sex, all of them, tech addiction, any addiction is coming from this thinking. And what have we been addicted to as a human species? That there's nothing we can do about it. And all I got to do is make a life for myself and feel better about it. And, I don't know what to do. We absolutely know what to do when we are not doing the thing we absolutely know. So we are suffering the consequences as a collective and pretending it has nothing to do with us. So I'm making that point again because the mental obsession is the core of all addictive tendencies that are choices to make believe that what's true is real, that what's wrong can be right, and what we conclude is truth and reality. It is not. It's just a conclusion in thought. So she did what you didn't expect she would do when you stopped doing what you were doing, predicting what she would do. Right?
Yeah.
It's pretty good evidence that there's a lot of great possibility beyond the impossibility of our thinking.
And that's actually what I prefer to explore and experience.
Yes. Well, and that's what if the absolute nature of our nature is our nature, let's talk from that point of view and actually express it. And I guarantee you, we will come up with things we have never even discussed, because technically we've never discussed anything until right now. This is all new, but it's repeated. And some of these things seem like they're just said for the first time when we've been talking about it for 2+ years. And as Loretta pointed out, when she's all of a sudden listening, she hears things differently. And I certainly know that. I know how it is. When I look, I find. And when I'm looking, if you look at the story Bill told about the monk who was constantly spending time looking for his self-deception, he's looking at it as though it's a real self, which is deceptive, and wondering why he keeps finding more and more deception in his looking. Read through what the announcement talked about, because this has been an oversight, in my estimation, that is worth mentioning, because we've literally been treating fantasy as reality, thinking someday we're going to get the ego better, when in fact it's simply what we're thinking about it now that we're struggling with, as though it's true.
Well, I can give you a female side that simplifies everything here if you want.
Sure, why not?
If it simplifies it, certainly.
First of all, go look in the mirror. You're not an ugly person. You're a very handsome person. Okay.
Thank you.
Now, to stop you, Loretta, that is apparently not enough, because the issue, I got it, but I'm pointing out the issue has nothing to do with appearance, because the appearance of how we think we look is exactly what we're struggling with.
No, it does to me, because this is just a different opinion, Jack, a different view. Okay. Nothing to diss or not correlate with yours. But to me, if you feel good about the way you look and you have that confidence, and that swagger, you don't have to think about all this stuff. You just waltz in, wear some sunglasses, and, be your precious self. And she's lucky to know you. There you go.
Sounds like I need to get to Atlanta more and New Orleans, Houston, to Texas.
So there's many quick fixes, which is one of the reasons humans still are seeking a solution. And the issue is people that are some of the best people in the world seem to struggle with how they look. And the point is that the whole point of appearing to look better is exactly what ego is built on. No.
Please. Let's say, if you go out and in your robe, okay, or your pajamas, do you think you may look a little bit better if you put on some jeans and, brush your hair and brush your...
We're talking a little deeper than that. We're going to go a little beyond pajamas and robes and just start to look at the essence of what appears. When I think truth and reality is what I'm thinking, When
Okay.
I'm thinking, I'm projecting an image of truth and reality. I'm thinking something that I'm never going to live up to. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter how I look because I'm immersed in an opinion about appearance being what I'm projecting to try to promote an idea about myself that isn't true, because the self I'm talking about doesn't even exist except to the thinking I'm doing. Do I think it has any basis? And yet I'm seeing it as who I am.
I just feel better if I look good. That's all.
Okay. Has that been enough? Did that stop you from drinking?
No, and it has nothing
Okay. So we're talking about the essence,
I
the
understand.
primary disease of
Yep.
those promotional ideas that someone like Philip, who is a very good looking, healthy young man, still struggles in the same way that someone who may not look as good as he does and someone who may look better than he does. Because the issue is about promoting appearances as reality rather than noticing it's simply how things seem when we think they're true and real. They aren't truth and reality. It's a promotion of ideas of appearance. So the struggle
I'm
and the
talking
connection, by the way, the connection very often between humans isn't about how people look, but the inner connection of knowingness that people tend to light up around.
that's
But I'm not suggesting you can't look better, Loretta. I'm not suggesting we can't do things.
totally taking this out of proportion and wrong. Okay. Or not how I am, what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that having a self-confidence and you presenting yourself in a good way and having the light with you, is a good way to go out and meet people. Better.
Well, if you had a self
Light
that's
is always with
absolute, if who you are in your essence is absolutely indisputable, you don't need self-confidence and you don't need self-positive affirmations, because the positivity of that knowing is sufficient because there's nothing else you know.
I'm
And
just not that deep. Not that deep. It isn't that deep. It's not about anybody.
no, it
else.
isn't that deep. It's absolutely
It's
superficial.
not about the way anyone else looks. That has nothing to do with what I'm talking about or looking better than someone else. It's about your identity and how you present yourself.
It's exactly what I'm talking about, is our identity. Our identity is being a present knowing awareness right now that is absolutely who we are, that when we think it isn't, we want to look better because we need confidence to try to overcome the lack of confidence we have in an absolute state of being that can't change.
Well, this is just one of those things I just disagree with you on, Jack.
That's all right. I want you to disagree.
So
Consider, Loretta,
Philip, you've got a lot going for you, honey.
consider that what we're talking about here are not quick fixes.
No,
Fixes that have never been broken, because the absolute nature of existence is never altered from our absolute state of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
It's only what we're thinking we're struggling with.
I was raised in Texas, and my mother got up. She was like Donna Reed. She got dressed. That was the first thing she did. So that's kind of what I'm talking
My parents were models. I grew up on the idea that we looked better, and that's how we were. So I have some history in that, and I'm not debating that. I'm simply telling you that what we're here to look at, if there's anything to see, is an absolute state of being and awareness that is indisputable. And if that is the essence, my sense is we look great wearing a lot different things than we might think we only look great in, because the awareness of that presence is indisputable, rather than a fractured soul presenting themselves in ways that they're trying to patch up. There's an awareness to that is very, very compelling for other people. And to act in that way would be to think in that way. And to think in that way would be to concede that knowingness. And that knowingness becomes the common bond that becomes recognized between us, rather than the distinguishable differences that we can create to try to patch up the idea that we're separate and apart.
I'm just talking about the five senses. It's good to smell good. You know what I mean? Around a woman, it's kind of good to smell good.
Yeah.
Or clean.
Well, I will assure you that shit doesn't smell good, and promoting it is what we do when we're lying. We call it bullshit.
Are you serious?
We call it hogwash. No, I'm talking about the fact that we like to cover the smell, and people say, "Oh, you think your shit doesn't stink?"
Oh my God. What, just Philip left here.
What's that?
I said Philip left.
So there's an absolute state of knowing we know. And we know it all week when we don't think we know it. When we think we have problems, we still know it. And when we think other things are bigger problems that keep us from knowing it, we still know it. And we're still absolutely intact thinking we're not. And if it weren't that, thinking would be more powerful than all of that and undermine the whole premise of what Bill said and the whole idea of letting go absolutely and completely abandoning ourselves. And that's our discussion in a nutshell that can obviously go in any direction we take it.
Right.
But the reinforcement of that is that it never needs to be reinforced to be. It never needs to be reminded to be known. It never needs to be thought of to be known. And the awareness of our knowing is a much more profound experience than the malaise of our thinking tends to create and have us think it's all we know. That knowing awareness is absolutely our present state right now, and it's absolutely where we are, and it's always where we are. And anything contrary to that is simply thoughts that are errant in some way. And it isn't to say we can't have them, but when you have them freely for what they are, there is no imposition on them because we can do and think whatever we want without any of these consequences that we talk about suffering. It's automatic because it's ever present. It isn't somewhere else because it's always here now. Always where we are.
On the inside and the outside. Beautiful on the inside and the outside, right?
Doesn't mean we can't act sick. And when we do, if we are, it's worth admitting it's what we're doing that's causing it rather than trying to fix the symptom, trying to patch the thing up. Just starting to say, oh, it's my own inability or unwillingness. I have the ability. It's my unwillingness to actually just let what's happening happen, including the things I'm embarrassed about doing and thinking. Thinking is a primary action.
Yeah. Well, I don't know Philip, but he left. I hope I didn't scare him off, Jack.
No. He's got a schedule. It might have something to do with other than you.
Probably.
Maybe.
Anyway, well, I've got to run too, but I certainly have enjoyed the conversation.
I appreciate being here with you all. I know I have limits in my ability to convey this, and I can be insistent in my attempt, but I have found that it is not kind to be dishonest in any way. And sometimes that seeming honesty can seem very caustic and probably annoying and irritating. And I'm willing to suffer that if that's what it takes to get better at actually participating in this publicly and talking about it openly. So I do what I can to learn from it, and I fail often in that learning.
Touche. I do too.
We share in common what we do right and what we do wrong. We just put different faces, places, and times to it. And yet it's the same ultimate principled underlying fundamental issue that's constantly being replayed in all the stories and all the ideas we have, as though we're distinct and different. We're not. The book tells us that unity in the traditions were designed to help people not do the things that the historically fractured organizations. So all the traditions are about showing us that we're unified, and anonymity is a spiritual foundation, placing principles before personalities because principles precede personalities. We're just getting accurate about what we're doing. We're starting to see that's the nature of things, not the one I think is human nature. People have thought that the diseased nature of humans has become human nature. It's not. It's a chronic disturbance being replicated by thinking that thinking is the sole source we have, and that doing the thinking we've always done will somehow get better when it's proven to be miserably worse for decades and eons and so forth.
Right.
Love you guys.
I learned much more here. I just really learn a lot in these meetings. I love everybody that's in these
Well, my dear, I learn a lot from you. I do. I love our conversations. You have been willing at points of extreme resistance to continue to move right past them. And it's been fascinating to witness that because it gives
thanks, Loretta.
It gives me a reminder that I don't have any need to maintain those defenses either. I have no need, but I certainly can feel that they're necessary when I'm defensive and protective and fighting for something that has no basis. It's impossible to turn something that has no basis. I fight it to even give it credit to have a basis to fight. That's the insanity of it.
Me too.
I create pain and then blame my ego for the creation of it as though it exists, rather than it's just a thought about, it's a reflection of my thoughts.
Yeah.
We'll continue. I'm around.
Right.
Arliss, very good to see you. Thank you for coming and listening so patiently and fully. Love you.
Anthony,
Ty.
good to see you too.
Anthony.
Oh, Anthony. Okay. Ta-ta. Bye, Jack.
Love
Sturgis,
you
Jenna,
guys.
everyone
Bye.
who was here before.
Jack, I'm
Love
going to
you
call
guys.
you. I also got your wonderful
See you,
message.
Jack. I'll talk to you later.
Okay,
I'm gonna
bye.
call you